All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Access Succeed. This is Gearface. I am joined once again by D. D, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And today, now, D, we have talked about a lot of characters that you love on this show. We've talked about Potemkin, we've talked about Tager, we've talked about Remulus. But today, we are talking about a character that I don't think you have any strong feelings about at all, one way or another. We're talking about Emogine.
Well, that's
Um,
true. I don't have any personal feelings in the matter. She is the best character in the game, and you should play her. But like,
and
my feelings are not material to
yeah,
this.
it's completely that's an actual like universal fact that isn't just you talking.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
uh, Incredibly excited to get your opinion on this character that you have no opinions on. Um, quick before I get into my standard disclaimer stuff, quick peek behind the curtain. A couple weeks ago when D and I were running another lesson on Landrekia, actually, I'm doing my standard post lesson stuff. I'm taking off my various spreadsheet things, and I'm talking to D about what we want to do next time we record. And I mouse back over to Tabletop Simulator and find that he has taken the Emogene card, and every time I've said anything, he's increased it. He's zoomed in on it and increased its size, so it's like the size of the board. Um, and so I took from that we were probably doing Emogene next. And it turns out we are. So incredibly excited to learn about Emogene from D here. Um, Disclaimers, as always, before we get started. Number one, we're going to be talking about playing to win on this show. That is not the only way you can play Exceed. You can play Exceed for fun. I encourage you to play Exceed for fun. It's a good time if you do. If the lines of play that we describe on this show are not fun, please don't play that way. Play the way you do find fun. Number two, we tend to be pretty prescriptive about strategy on this show. These will be the rules to D's strategy with Emogene. They don't have to be yours. If you want to play a different way, if you think that you know better, you very well might. Exceed's not a solved game. Please develop your own lines of play and tell us why we're wrong. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, all that said, D, please take it away. Tell me a little bit about your completely neutral, unbiased opinions about Emogene.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'd like to begin with some grand philosophical truths, if that's all right.
Of course.
Okay. We're making a fuss about it because it's fun to do, but I will speak frankly here, right? It's well documented that Imogene is my favorite character, and if it wasn't well documented, it is now, right?
Yep.
We are documenting it.
Yep. This
Um,
is this is what
she's my
this is.
Yeah, she's of the hundred and number, 100 and
120.
change. Thank you.
Yep. I know
Characters
very
in Exceed.
well how many characters there are in this game. There's
Oh, I bet
120.
you do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
She is my number one favorite character. Um, However, she's not necessarily my strongest character. Are you familiar with this? The one true tier list.
This tier list, I have seen it. I have seen it floating around the Discord occasionally.
Yeah, this is the one true tier list. I have yet to find anybody who contests it.
Yep.
There was one objection when I first released it, which was that Autorathi should be in B minus, and so I added him.
Okay.
Um, this is a meme that we'll have to come back to if it needs explaining. But um, actually, no, sorry. For posterity, Autorathi is not a real character. He's a automaton. He
Yep.
he plays himself.
Yeah. He's a basically like a heuristic for running Marathi. Correct.
Exactly, he's a flowchart.
Yeah.
Like, and he's pretty stupid. But
Well,
turns out
I mean,
Marathi's deck actually functions when you're pretty stupid. So
yeah. He's only B minus tier though. So
exactly,
yeah, there's room to grow for him.
there's legitimately a chance that you will lose to him, and actually a pretty high chance that you'll lose to him if you're playing a character you've never played before and your fundamentals are not rock solid. Um, like that. Hence why there is a tier. There are a couple tiers below that actually. Um, all right. So based on the one true tier list, the strongest character in the game, the top tier is your main or your mains.
Yes.
Um, so this isn't 100% true. It's shorthand for multiple similar statements which are true, but which are not nearly as concise as just saying, yeah, top tier is your main. Your main is top tier. Um, so I want to break this down. Like I said, like big grand universal statements here. Uh, if you describe a character as your main, you will probably perform well with them due to some combination of comfort and confidence, experience and preference. Like if you say a character is your main, then you'll probably be better with them than if with a character that you say is not.
Sure.
Uh, Like that's just that's descriptive. That's observational, right?
Yeah. You're self-selecting for your own skill level at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Second, if you determine that a character suits your preferences well enough that you'll happily play them most of the time or all the time or very, very frequently, you will get better at playing that character. Your skill will
Yes.
increase.
Yep.
Like, yep, that's pretty well established. And then relatedly, third, player skill, not character strength, is the dominant factor in deciding the outcome of a game of Exceed.
Right.
Um, I think you're probably more familiar with this saying that I'm trying to think of right now than I am. It's passed down from ancient times, Smash Brothers Melee. A skilled.
A skilled Roy can beat any fox. D.
Thank you, thank you. Which
Yeah.
I understand to be like half a joke in Melee, but not it really isn't in Exceed, where
Right.
um, by the skin of my teeth, I lost a game as Pookie against Alice, and Alice is banned. Like she's not a reasonable character, but my opponent was like Pookie might be his worst character,
Right.
and Alice is not mine. Um, and so he was flailing because he didn't know what Pookie was doing, and he was bad with Alice, and I knew what Alice was doing, and I knew what Pookie was doing,
Yep.
and it makes a difference. So to sum up, your main is probably your strongest character, but especially depending on why or how you choose your mains, not all mains are created equal. And if you chose a character as your main, not really based on how well you wield them or how effectively you can use their tools or how well they suit your playstyle, it may take a lot more work to master them than if you had, picked another character as your main who did suit you. Uh, with me so far?
Yes, I am.
Great. So Imogene is not my strongest character in no small part because there's a facet of her play which she is designed to do that I do not do. And I'm going to talk about that pretty explicitly when we get to it because it is something that I just prefer not to do. I don't like it.
Okay.
And it holds me back from mastering the character 100%. Um, I want to be the world's best Imogene because she's my favorite character. I am probably still a competitor for that because I've played is that true? Probably hundreds of games of Imogene. I played a lot of Imogene. Um, and I've got the time, I've got the experience, and I certainly have the comfort level.
Right.
Um, but there's still things in her kit that I don't fully wield to their maximum potential because they don't line up with what I want to do, how I want to play. Um, so let's talk about that kit and how Imogene works and how to play her. The first most prominent thing we should talk about is this.
Okay.
Uh, Set your wild swings face up is always true. It is just at the start of the card, right?
Right. It's not an
So
action that you take. It's literally every time you wild swing offense or defense, it is face up.
correct. That is some
Okay.
rules text right there that you're going to have to keep in mind because if you initiate a strike with a wild swing, um, it's going to be face up. Your opponent will know what it is.
Right.
Now, of course, nobody in the world would initiate strikes with wild swings. That's complete insanity, right? Uh,
Never.
yeah, except that I do this all the time. This is normal to me. I've talked before, and I probably will talk again. Certainly, I'm going to talk now about how if you know what's in your deck, you feel like initiating a strike, you don't need to use your hands,
Right.
right? Run the numbers and go, okay, 30% of my deck is awesome, 60% of it is reasonable, 10% sucks. Sure, I'll strike without spinning a card from hands.
You like those
Like
odds? Sure.
I'm pretty happy with that.
Sure. You'll
Um,
do that on characters where nowhere in their entire kit does it say the words wild swing. You'll do this on characters who
absolutely,
who who are not built to do this because it's a good thing
absolutely.
to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do this as Linné. I'll do this as Ragna. I'll do this as a bunch of characters where I'm going, okay, I've got a consistent favorite range. I've managed to weed out through the course of play a number of things that don't work well at my current range. I'm counting cards and paying attention to things. I need to press the offense, press the offensive. Yeah, press the offensive, and now it's time to do it. So I'll do it,
Yep.
and then keep my hands because cards are resources.
Yep. Yep. Okay.
Yep. So Imogene creates a drawback to doing that.
Right.
But she
Because
also
because
provides
you,
go ahead.
because you're setting it face up and you love doing that anyway, so now you might get in trouble for doing it.
Yes, like something that I was already probably going to do now has a significant drawback. But let's read the rest of the card. Before setting a wild swing, look at the top card of your deck. You may spend a life to add it to your gauge, uh, which means your wild swings get a lot better, offense or defense, because you get to look at one card and go, does this make any sense at all? Right? Your chances of being outranged 2, 3, 4, and wild swinging a grasp go down significantly if you can look at one card and say, oh, that's grasp? No, it's gone. get rid of
Right.
it.
Especially if you've already seen one. Right now it goes to
Mhm.
0. You just have the ability to say no, not this card.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So you get kind of two swings at getting a card that makes sense, and fairly often, what this also can be, like the additional usage of this, maybe even the more common usage for this for a lot of people, just not me, is if you're losing the strike anyway, pay a life, get a gauge without spending any time.
Right.
Um, your opponent strikes, you go, okay, let me look the top card of my deck, make sure that it's not secretly some awesome card that's going to win the strike despite my opponent having +2 power, +2 speed in play, and then spend a life, add it to gauge, go to the next card.
Cloud swing again. Sure. And
Yeah,
if it is that awesome card that will secretly win the strike, you're like, oh man, now I don't get a gauge out of it. But then you just play the card and you get the gauge anyway.
yeah, there you go. Like it's gonna work for you anyway. Um, but yeah, so two shots at any wild swing. Now this has some interesting interactions with one of Exceed's universal rules, which let's talk about now. Awesome cards that are going to win the strike. Um,
Yes.
Ultras.
Yep.
All right. So I know you know this, but I'll quiz you anyway. Right? When you reveal in Ultra as a wild swing, what happens?
When you reveal an ultra as a wild swing, you are prompted to validate it from gauge by paying the gauge. But because usually this is coming from wild swinging, you have the option to say no and continue on,
Exactly.
and discard it and wild swing again.
Exactly. So if you look, I'm just gonna grab a you know deck here. But yeah, if you look at your top card and you go, oh, it's an Ultra.
Right.
Uh, well, you can then set it instead of adding it to gauge, knowing that it's going to be invalid, and get interesting choices because each of these are designed to play into this mechanic, which we often will call an option select, which is after a fighting game term, where this one says if it's invalid, you have +3 power.
Right. On whatever you wild swing next,
Yes.
presumably. Yeah.
Yeah. So that you have +3 power this strike. So like, your main attack, whatever it ends up being, your final valid attack is how we express it in rules.
Right.
Uh, has +3 power. And you go, okay, well, I may have been losing the strike, but maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm trading up. Maybe I'm crushing you. This has also way more useful properties I'll go into later. But anyway,
Okay.
so it's obviously intended to play into the ability to invalidate, where you go, hey, if you have 4 gauge, you can flip this and then decide after reveal whether you're keeping it or not,
Right.
as long as it was a wild side.
Right.
Um, Similarly, this one doesn't even require you to have gauge because it says if this is wild swing, you may spend 3 life instead of paying its gauge cost. Uh,
And then you can decide to validate it with nothing.
yeah, so you can decide I'm gonna pay. If you have gauge, you can decide to pay gauge. If you have life, you can decide to pay life. Or if you look at the strike and you go, well, that's not going to win the strike, you can say, actually, never mind. We skip it and we go to the next card.
Great.
Um,
And we skip it either by invalidating it and moving on, or by paying a life for my character ability and putting it in my gauge.
you could do that, yes. 90% of the
Okay.
time, if not more, it's better to set the ultra. Um, so let's talk about the two ways this is going to happen. One is you did choose to initiate, right?
Okay.
Let me get a dummy over here.
Sure.
For the sake of argument, we'll say you're at range 2 because this is if you're at range 2, you're probably initiating. Anyway, um, this spoilers, that's your favorite range. Um, you initiate with a wild swing and you look at this and you go, well, if I set this, it's face up, but also it isn't because if you set this, they know that's what you set, but they don't know if you're validating because you only decide that after reveal.
Because validation happens after reveal. Okay.
Hmm. Yeah. So you set it face up, but you haven't revealed it. This is a weird terminology thing, right? But like,
Whoa. Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
You're
the
right.
reveal step happens later.
Right. Right. Okay.
Yeah, so I've had this happen, right? Like I set my attack and my opponent goes, "Okay, are you paying for that?" And I go, "You don't know."
You don't know yet. Right.
And they're like, "Oh, right."
They have to put their card down first, and they haven't done that yet, and they have to show you their card first.
Exactly. They have to set something and then we will both reveal. And my reveal looks like this, right? I don't flip the card. I just go, "Okay, it's revealed."
It's revealed now. You can look
Yeah.
at it.
Yeah, and now they reveal and we both look at both the cards and I go, "Oh, I see you played a thing that actually beats this. Well, then never mind. I'm not really playing that. I'm playing something else."
Something else
Um,
instead. Okay.
yeah, potentially something much scarier.
Do
Mhm.
you have when you're using your character ability D? So before setting a wild swing, look at the top card of your deck, spend 1 life to add it to your gauge. All right, so I did that. Now I have a new wild swing that I'm setting. Can I just do it again?
No.
Okay,
The
it's
before
once
setting is
per.
one timing.
Okay, got it.
So
So
basically,
that
before
that is
setting,
like
you can
kind of
look
a
at this
binding. Okay,
and add your gauge, and whether you do or don't, you then set your wild swing, which means you're past the point at which, but you're past the before setting.
understood. Okay, and that is still set face up though.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Interesting. So I have a lot of extra consistency in my wild swings. I have the ability to build gauge, but I also have this thing that lets me uh, by looking at my wild swing ahead of time, I can also combo my ultras into this weird invalidation thing I can do.
Yes. Yeah. You can take advantage of this tech. Basically, is what's going on. Which
Right.
like this one, often, especially if you're initiating, it's going to win the strike because this
On
is a
on curve 7 damage
on curve 7 damage. Like, and it's dirt cheap. I mean, it's 3 life or two
or 2
gauge, but
gauge. Right.
yeah. And I'll talk more. We'll go over the kit in detail in a bit. But what's really special is this one because your opponent is going to be expecting you to be, if you're initiating with the wild swing like a complete madman, then they get to know what your attack is and they can find a thing that beats it. But this doesn't tell them what your attack is.
Right. It just tells them possibly that either it's this, which is already threatening, or the thing that you're going to reveal instead is going to be more threatening. Or I'm sorry, the thing that you're
Exactly.
going to set instead is going to be more threatening.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Because this would, yeah. But like, yeah, if you have the 4 gauge, then you're threatening this, but you're saying, but I can still choose not to play it. And if I choose not to play it, then my next thing is going to have +3 power.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
and then if you don't have 4 gauge, which is going to be most of the time, 4 gauge is a lot, especially on a transformation character. Even though
Yep.
you build gauge pretty easily, you will also be spending it a lot. And I'll show why in a bit. But like 4 gauge is a lot. But you know, if you don't have 4 gauge, it's still, hey, I'm striking you. I have +3 power, and who knows? You don't get to know what I'm striking. It's just a wild swing with +3 power.
It could be pretty bad for you at this point. So
Yep.
D, when frequently at around this point in the lesson, once I've learned what the character ability does, I ask my expert, like, all right, so how often are you using this? But because of how Imogene's character ability works, that seems like a slightly less relevant question because you're going to be using it when your wild swing isn't going to work or when you're able to do one of these combos. So I guess the sort of adjacent question to ask instead is how often are you wild swinging as Imogene?
Yeah, and obviously this is where my bias comes into play because my play style involves a lot of wild swinging. But the answer is, in short, probably any time you're at range 2. Because well, we'll go over the kit in a bit, but range 2 is awesome for you.
Yep.
Um, on defense, most of the time, unless you have something specific in hands.
Okay.
So like when I'm playing Imogene, right? The cards that I'm actually setting as attacks are often going to be a wild swing, an EX, or focus, right?
Okay.
Uh, because focus does not need any extra stuff to be good. 7 defense, it's pretty good.
Yep.
Um, everything else here, I'm like, all right, well that's good, but I could also play that off my deck. Except an EX because she
You
cannot
can't
set an EX wild
you
swing.
you can't do that. And not having actually looked through the character super closely prior to this lesson, she doesn't have anything like superior or badass that would let her sort of like cheat in an EX attack off a wild swing.
Negative. Yeah,
Gotcha.
she actually has no bonus stats on her boosts, and the only stats that she gets in other ways is power.
Okay.
No extra speed, no extra armor, no extra guard, although she has plenty of printed guard. But yeah, so how often is she wild swinging? In my opinion, a lot. Most of the time the opponent initiates, when you're at range 2 especially. And that's where I like to initiate in particular because you have extra on curve stuff at 2, where you have a speed 6 special and a speed 6 ultra that are both perfectly good wild swings that your opponent can't just cross out of.
Right.
Um, and if you're not at range 2, then things get dicier, and you honestly probably should be moving to range 2 because
That's where
so
you'd prefer to wild
that's
swing
great.
anyway.
Yeah, like I for a long time I've characterized Imogene as a grappler. It's like she's a range 2 grappler. She's not a range 1 grappler. But she has backbreaking payouts, and they're horrifying, and they mostly exist at range 2. And
Okay.
she's going to be spending a lot of life on positioning. Uh,
When you say spending life on positioning, the only reason I ask is because she has a thing that literally allows her to spend life. What you mean
oh,
by
excuse
that,
me.
I assume, is because your opponent will be hitting you for that life.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
gotcha.
I'm
Okay,
yeah. Like you stop at range 4. You have literally nothing that works beyond range 4.
okay,
No projectile games. You can do some stuff at range 4, but if your opponent has like a range 4 projectile that pushes 1, can't do anything about it. Um, and you have a bunch of movement on exactly one card. Nothing else in your kit moves. Um, so moving is often done with force.
yep, okay,
You use this attack. You use this boost. Note that they're both on the same card. All your movement is on one card. Um, or you pay resources. So paying resources often means you're going to put yourself in a bad situation where you end up eating some sort of payout from your opponent because you have no resources now.
right.
Luckily, you have a good way to mitigate that, but even then, you'll take some hits and then you'll hit back much harder. Not during the same strike usually, but the next strike.
Okay. It's interesting because a lot of characters that have been characterized either explicitly by the text on the cards themselves or just by play patterns as wild swing characters tend to be very like consistent pressure heavy. I'm thinking about like a Giovanna or the way that you play Eno or something like that. The way that
Mhm.
you're describing it though, it sounds like Emogine is more about like crazy payouts than she is about consistent pressure. Is that true?
That is generally true. Like what she like mini grapplers, she exerts pressure by being at her favorite range. Like if she goes to range 2, she has one card in hand, you're still not safe.
Right, sure.
Um, like you are in danger. Maybe not as much danger as like range 1 Potemkin, but close. Um, and if you don't do something to get out of that situation, like now she is threatening. So like she is exerting some pressure by making you not be at her favorite range.
Right.
And the way her resource engine works with when her transformations are set up, which I'll again go over in detail. Um, but the way her transformations work means that she actually does this in a way which tends to exert, how do I put it? It's pressure. It's gradual pressure. Like her pressure is inexorable but weak. It's a lot like uh, well, I'd say it's grappler-esque. Like she's going to move toward you.
Right.
The way somebody described it once that I really love, which will make more sense when I put all these pieces together, is that she's a horror movie monster where you blow her to pieces and then she takes steps toward you and every step she regenerates. And then she gets up in your face and now she's stronger than she was before and you're not sure what happened.
Right.
Like, um, and that your goal is in the time between those two steps before she gets up in your face is that you sorry counterplay I mean the opponent's goal is before she gets back to your face, like do enough damage that when she hits you for 7 or 10 or 11 or 12, um you're not losing the game.
Those are high
um
numbers that you just said, D.
no, they're not for imaging.
For Imogene,
uh
okay. Awesome. I love this character.
I've got 7 on 3 cards, and I can make 7 pretty easily on a bunch of others, and 12 is within reach, and I'll explain how in a bit.
All right.
um
Sounds good.
all right, now let's actually, still before we even go over the kit, I'm
Okay.
gonna have way too much fun talking about all the cards, but uh let's now talk about the other imaging. Hekaton Gear.
Yes.
Um, so this is a season 2 character. Like most, is this true? Yeah, like most season 2 characters, like all 7 cross characters. Her Exceed mode is a side grade. It is not a strict upgrade. It is different from her basic ability. Um, and it also doesn't have a normal cost. So, sorry, flipping back. The cost is 6, but each of her transformations in play reduces it by 2.
Right.
And getting a transformation in play means you either hit with the attack or you spent a turn, an action, discarding one and playing the other from hand. So you collected the EX basically.
Right.
Um, so it's going to take either time or it's going to take risks where you had to land hits. Mhm.
Sure.
That's how you get transformations. 6 means 3 transformations reduces it to 0. Um, you have 4, so like that's within reach. It's
Sure.
a lot to spend if you're going to spend it. I think no, yeah, I have spent 6 gauge to exceed, but it was I think only one game ever, really. Like it's not a thing that's going to happen very often.
Right. And
Um,
if you have two transformations now, you have a 2 gauge exceed cost. Like they're incrementally
yeah,
reduced, right?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and 2 is not that bad to afford, especially when you can build gauge. But like I said, you also spend it a lot. Anyway, all right. So once you've exceeded, you no longer have the text set your wild swing space up.
Right.
Instead, you have kind of the inverse, where instead of showing your opponent stuff, you get to see it. You may look at the top card of your deck at any time. Anytime ever, right? So, just
Right.
always look at the top card of your deck and go, "Okay, now I know." Draw for a turn? Okay, 1 second. Cool, now I know,
Yep. Okay.
right? Just pay attention to it, and you don't necessarily have to memorize it because you can just check it again if you forget.
Right.
Um, there's some other text on this, but that's the important part. We'll come back to that. Um, you might guess why that's important.
I would love to know.
You can set this from hands when you don't have 4 gauge.
If this attack is invalid, your attack has +3 power this strike, and I know what's on top of my deck, and it's gonna hit. So cool. I just get
Yeah,
+3 power now strike off of an
yeah,
invalid ultra for no
you know,
cage cost on
yeah,
defense.
like, you eventually, are looking at your deck and you go, "Oh, neat. We're at range 2 and that's on top. Cool. I'll just set this and hit for 10."
Hit for
Like,
10. That like we talk about how like all right +3 power. If Fierce were +3 power, that'd be very strong.
that would be insane.
If Fierce were +3 power now strike, that'd be very very strong. This is +3 power now strike on your opponent's turn.
Yeah, if you want it to be, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's pretty messed up.
yep. Yeah,
Okay,
you're usually gonna be doing it on your turn because you are gonna be caring about hitting on curve, but if their crosses are down, never mind. Like, just murder them, I guess. Um, yeah, and then, you know, so yeah, the rest of the text on this. When your turn begins, you may spend a life to put the top card of your deck in the bottom of your deck. So, you look at the top of your deck and you're like, "Ah, it's some card that doesn't hit at a range that I care about." Well,
right.
sure, like,
Away it
we
goes.
we just away it goes. And now you can, still look at the top card of your deck at any time. Oh, look, the next one's on curve. There you go. Now you can set this and hit for 7.
Right.
Um, easy. So your exceed ability in particular makes touch divinity into the thing that kills people. It is
Okay.
the touch of death. Um,
That's sort of the canonical combo.
yep, it is the easiest way to set up touch divinity to do amazing things. Maybe not the easiest; it's the second easiest. And also you just have nice control over looking at the top of your deck at any time and occasionally filtering it to be a little bit better. In theory, you could set up your bottom deck. In practice, I found that's going to cost too much life if you want to set up 3 or 4 cards in the bottom of your deck. Like, that's taking a long time
Right.
and like several turns, and you probably can be doing more efficient things. Um, but even so, it's nice to be able to go, oh, actually, this card is useless at the current range. No, like, let me make sure that I have access to something useful.
Right. Even if you're
Because,
not doing touch of divinity things, the ability to basically have 2 free shots at a wild swing, just like it is on front side, right?
right,
It's
exactly.
that's still beneficial. It's just that instead of going to your gauge, it's going back to your deck.
Right, and importantly, um, this is something that you're doing at the start of your turn, meaning you
Right.
can't do it in reaction to your opponent striking, right? So your opponent strikes, and you're like, "Oh, shoot, my next card wasn't any better."
Right.
Um, like your turn begins, and you go, "Okay, this top card was useless. We put it at the bottom." I look at the next card. I'm like, "All right, I'm happy to draw that." I, prepare, change cards, whatever. I get some cards. Well, I'd be happy about that one, but if the next card was also useless,
Sure.
then your opponent strikes and you go, "Well, shoot, I have a useless wild swing and a handful of cards I don't want to use."
Right.
Um,
Because
that's the situation.
you
Mm,
can't do your front side trick of adding to gauge on your opponent's turn. Right.
exactly. And this, by the way, is the thing that I don't like. This is why I don't generally play the Hecate here. Um, there are two kinds of false dichotomy in the world. Sorry, I mean there's two kinds of imaging players in the world. Um, there are imaging players who look at the Hecate here and go, "Ew, why would I want that?" And there are Hecate here players who look at Emogine and go, "Oh, that sucks," but Hecate here looks so good.
Right.
Um,
And
and I
you
love that she appeals to both camps, but I am very much an Emogine player.
okay. And like this isn't really an evaluation of uh each side's power relative to each other as much as it is how much it vibes with your personal playstyle.
That is what I'm. Yeah, that is my claim. Like
Okay.
the Hecate here is unquestionably stronger at ending the game because it allows you to initiate with a wild swing without your opponent knowing what you're doing, without needing touch divinity in hands. Right?
Right.
So if you're in basic mode, the only way that you get to initiate with the wild swing without your opponent seeing it is if you set this from hands, well, or this actually, if you don't have the gauge. Um,
Right.
because then you go, okay, I'm setting it and they don't know it, but there's a huge problem with this, which is that You have things that say when you set a wild swing, and you didn't. You won't get any of your transformation bonuses that we'll talk about in a bit, which say when you set a wild swing, which is literally 3 of them.
Yeah.
Um, like if you set the card from hands, the replacement is not setting a wild swing. The replacement is replacing it.
Oh, I see. Okay, so that's true for. Hold on, is the text on set your wild swings face up? Look at the top card. So on both sides, when Emogine uh, does her replacement tech, it
Mhm.
that does not count as setting another wild swing.
Correct. Yeah. So let me go through this explicitly. You have
Yeah,
this transformation, which says when you set a wild swing, gain 1 life. Right.
right.
So if as Imogene, I set this from hands, reveal, invalid,
Invalid.
replace.
Right.
I do not gain a life for doing
You don't
either
get
any
that.
of this.
But
I did not set a wild swing at any point.
the Hecatoncheir would, because they are actually. I mean, not from this
Not by doing
interaction,
that.
but
Not by doing that.
they are able to have a mix up from a mix up a card that has not been revealed when they're striking as a wild swing, while
Exactly.
also getting the benefits of their transforms.
Exactly. So yeah, if you're like, oh man, I sure want to play, you know, Spike here at range 2 because I think it will get my opponent.
Right.
Well, if you're Imogene and it's on top of your deck, Spike's probably not going to win a strike. Face up, Spike does not win very many strikes.
No, people usually know how to play around that.
Yep.
I mean, if they have anything that beats it. Yeah.
Yep. But Hexen Cure can set a face down Spike from the top of her deck and still get a bunch of extra benefits.
Right. Okay. And so that's the upside. The downside for the Hecatoncheir is that she can't do any of her fun shenanigans on defense.
Right. Yeah, like the only thing she can do is just what Touch Divinity always does, which is that you can set it from hand to have a thing and you know your top deck. But that's really how Touch Divinity works.
Anyway.
You know, yeah. But like Hexen Cure does not get to look at the top deck, go, it sucks, I'm not doing it, and replace it on your opponent's turn.
Right.
You're locked into it. And for me, the feeling of like part of why I like having one reason I love Wild Swings, right, is that from my perspective, I am not playing this card. I am playing a stack of percentages.
Your deck, right.
Right. So when I Wild Swing, I'm like, yeah, proportionally this makes sense. But if I know the card, that stops being true. Right? I'm like, oh, I no longer have the choice of playing 1 out of 20, a stack of good percentages. I have the choice of playing this card.
This card or these cards.
Or these cards.
So you're thinking of the Hecatoncheir's ability as essentially being you always have one more card in your hand.
Yeah,
that you can only
you can't wild swing.
You can't wild swing, and you also can't boost with that card.
True.
Interesting. Okay, sure. Yeah. No, and from the way that you think about wild swings, that makes sense as being kind of a disincentive for you.
Yeah, it takes away like I said, it takes away the mechanic of wild swinging in all its glory. It just turns it into a new kind of offensive technique that you can use, which is nice, but it's a thing that you need, and it's a thing that is very good at closing games for very good reasons. It's not a thing that I like to do.
Okay. So is it so how do I put this? Like we've talked about other characters like Tinker Knight before, where you don't like to exceed because you think that their front side is stronger or suits their playstyle better. Can you be forced to exceed as Emogene, or is it more just like the way that you play the character is just more suited to this character than to this character?
I would say that there are times when it's correct to switch to Hecatoncheir, and it's specifically that you're looking to close the game and you have Touch Divinity available is when it's the likeliest to happen.
Okay.
For a lot of people, they'll want to spend more of the game as Hecatoncheir, and that's a playstyle preference. It's how much of the game do you spend on either side. And there are games, and I've certainly had games where I never felt like it was correct to flip to Hecatoncheir, regardless, because no matter what else you say about it, it takes a turn. Right. And turns are precious.
Sure.
And that can matter quite a bit.
So you are a frontside Emogene player who will regularly switch to Hecatoncheir in order to end the game with Touch of Divinity. Other players are Hecatoncheir players who spend some time as Emogene.
Or there are other Emogene players. I'm far from the only one. Like this is I'm yeah. I'm not unique and special in that regard, nor was I even for Synchronite, although I think I'm one of the very few Synchronites who prefers front side, or like who does not want to exceed.
Right.
But yeah, like it's pretty common to prefer the Emogine over the Hecaton Kier. It's actually, I think Blue and I were surveying people for a very long time, and it really came down to like a 50-50 split where we were seeing both camps well represented.
Okay.
And nobody who didn't like Emogine, which is correct because everyone should like Emogine. But anyway,
Which
that's
because she's the best character in the game, of
because she's the
course.
best character in the game. Yeah, but that's the facetious remark aside.
Right.
Yeah, so it seems like most people will prefer one or the other.
Right. It sounds like even the people who have a strong preference one way or another, though, will play the other way sometimes. You will flip, even though you prefer Emogine. Players who prefer the Hecaton Kier will obviously still use Emogine because you start the game as her.
Right. Yeah. So the Hecaton Kier players are not going to initiate on front side.
Okay.
Right. And Emogine players are not going to exceed unless they have touch divinity.
Okay, I understand. Gotcha.
Like that's kind of the you needed to do this to do that. You needed that to do this. Like otherwise you're not going to be using the ability to do the kind of play style that you don't like.
Right. Sure.
All right. So that's the big look at how Emogine works, of what her ability is, why there are two Emogines, why Emogine and Hecaton are actually different characters, because people will play them differently, even though they really are one contiguous character.
Right.
All right. Is it time to get excited about cards?
I hope so.
Okay, good. So yeah, like I said, 7's not a big number. What are you talking about? 7's perfectly ordinary. So let me move this aside. All right. Here, so Ground Zero is a fun card. I also like this card. It's not quite Ground Zero, but it's close. Sorry, Ground Zero is a rimless card for posterity.
A rimless card. Right.
So 1, 3, 6, 4 with 5 guard. So 4 speed, 5 guard is fast enough. At 4 speed, your opponent's not playing dive to get over you. And depending on positioning, they might not be able to get away from you with cross, and they certainly aren't going to stun you with assault.
Right.
So the problem with this card, right, is that it costs 3 life. It says before you may spend 3 life. If you don't, this doesn't hit. Like you must spend 3 life in order to hit. But this card does 7 damage at speed 5, which is on curve at range 3. And 7 stuns everything at range 3, except for focus, which doesn't hit back.
Which doesn't hit back, sure.
So, just nuke them. Like, EX Guilty Pan is amazing.
And like, oh no, I've taken 3 damage and dealt 7. That's a delta of 4, right? That's less
It's unusually good for a trade.
Right, sure, yeah, but like I'm thinking about that in terms of like what I would get if I won clean or something. But I need to also remember that even though I dealt 3 damage to myself, I also didn't give my opponent gauge. I didn't let them do anything useful on their strike. Like that is, despite me taking damage on that is a bigger win than 4 would suggest.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And as I said, and 4 is also actually pretty good because clean wins often come in 3s.
Yeah.
Like cross and grasp, getting out clean tend to be hit for 3, and that's about it.
Right.
But yes, you will want to be wary of cross when you're at range 3, because they can cross out of literally anything at range 3. But if they manage to get themselves cornered, then yeah, you can just sort of squish them with this at range 1 or 2 or 3, and it will work.
Right. I'm noticing that you are also advocating for I'm sorry if I'm getting ahead of you here. You're advocating for an EX attack on an attack that has a transform on it.
Yes.
And given that you can also EX transform cards if you have 2 copies of them, it sounds like that is a stronger use case for this card than just doing the EX transform.
Yeah, which is kind of surprising because this transform is amazing.
Okay.
So let's see. When you set a Wild Swing, which remember, if you set a card from hands, then even if you replace it, you are not setting a Wild Swing.
Correct.
But yeah, when you set a Wild Swing, it gains hits. You may spend 1 gauge. If you do, +2 power. So it is your attack. That is to say, even if you invalidate Touch Divinity, then the replacement will have that. It's your attack has. Hey, you have +2 power all the time, basically.
Yeah.
If you're Wild Swinging as much as I advocate for, this transformation is amazing. It just says, okay, you're going to be spending 1 life for +2 power at the end of the day. Like you will gradually be building gauge by spending life and then spending it to gain power.
Right. Okay. And that interaction that you mentioned a second ago about how replacing a card is not setting a wild swing. That also means that if you have 0 gauge, you cannot build gauge with your front side ability and then immediately cash out with the power. They need to be 2 separate interactions, correct?
Incorrect, because this is a hit effect.
Oh, you may
Yes,
spend
it's
1
not when you set a
gauge.
wild swing, you may spend a gauge. It's when you set a wild swing, it gains hits. You may
Oh,
spend 1
okay.
gauge.
So I set a wild swing. It
Yes,
is
and
an
now it has this text.
it actually is this card, and then I invalidate it and replace the card. I have still set a wild swing that
Yes.
I still get my ability.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Right. So in that case, you will be casually striking with +5 power. Um, now it did cost you this from the top of your deck, and that means that had to end up on top of your deck. But if you're wild swinging a lot, then statistically you're going to run into your ultras as you wild swing. Like,
Sure.
you've got 4 of them in your deck, you'll run through them.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, this also has the wonderful case of uh initiating face up and then saying, because this was a wild swing, either if you had 0 gauge, you didn't have 0 gauge, right? If you had 0 gauge, you spent a life and now you have a gauge. And then the
Right.
next card has +2 power. And so you can look at your opponent and go, all right, here, it's face up. You can't even trade with focus. This is 9 power,
Right.
right? You have 6 power assaults, which trade reasonably with sweep, even if you're not the happiest. You can just get extra value on a bunch of things with extra value, and then you're threatening really dumb breakpoints with things like Hand of Judgments, things like Dive if you're at range 4, it's just 7 power Dive. And the best of all worlds is the one where you set a face up touch divinity and you say, yeah, this is probably +5 power. Have fun.
Yeah. That's 5 is too much, right? 5 is too many power for a now strike or a mid strike thing to have. That's crazy.
Yeah, well, you'll
Um,
note with +5 power, you're not going to get a number. You're not going to get a number lower than 8, which is why I said 7 ain't that much.
yeah,
Uh,
that's very true. And like yeah, that is a specific combo, but and that's like my threshold for 5 power. But then you listed 4 more cards I could use that give me some pretty good numbers anyway.
mhm.
So I'm not incredibly concerned. Like it's not like this is only useful when I have Touch of Divinity ready.
Oh no, no, you're going to be using this transformation all the time because this transformation is one you can always choose to use, right? Like it only
Right.
costs you as a hit effect, so there's no investment cost. It's just available. And if
Right.
you don't have gauge, you can get gauge. Like it's something that will always be accessible once you have it. I do recommend not using EX Guilty Pan if your opponent can cross out.
Can cross out,
Um,
sure.
because you don't want to not have this transformation and you don't want to not land this attack.
Right.
But you are by default the person who's going to be in the center 3 spaces or center 5 spaces of the board, because you are not the zoner. You are the
Right.
less mobile of the matchup, almost certainly.
You
Um,
will often be doing the cornering and slowly doing the cornering rather than getting cornered or something like that.
exactly. Like once you're here, your opponent's going to want to be over here, and then you'll start to do the merry chase to the opposite end of the screen.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
and so because of that, you'll have windows where you'll get here or here, and you'll say, cool, range 3, range 2, let's go.
Eat a lot of damage, and I just got my transform probably nearly guaranteed in most situations.
Yep.
Um.
Yeah.
So, and if I am in this situation and they could cross out and I have the EX, maybe at that point either wait and until I'm a little bit closer so I can land it, or just EX transform it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't want to risk whiffing it. You're a grappler. It's a backbreaker. You're fine with it's part of a mix-up that your opponent managed to beat because they committed all their resources, right? You lose to an
Right.
ultra and you're sad, but you lost to an ultra, right?
Right.
Like some random ultra. But you're not fine with like, oh, you just whiffed because they left.
Right.
Like,
Because they played a 0 commitment easy defensive answer card that kind of beats a lot of things.
yeah, like
Okay.
that's not good.
Gotcha.
You're also
Gotcha.
fine with them
Okay.
blocking, by the way. Like you spend 3 life and they took 0 damage. Okay, they paid resources and you got an amazing transformation. That's still fine.
Right. Yeah, that's a pretty big upside for you, sure.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right, so that's guilty pan. Makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Cool. Next 7 power attack.
So we have and I will often have less life than my opponent, so this EX attack will frequently hit for 7.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
So another on curve or at range 4 above curve, but often on curve because you're playing at 3. Or sometimes it's just a range 2 thing that if they don't have space to cross out of, uh, like, so, we're here, uh, or here. There you go. They can cross out of anything except Holy Warding. So
Right.
here, have a Holy Warding that hits for 7 that you can't assault into, you can't cross out of, you can't tank with anything except focus, which is only going to hit me back for 2, by the way, because I have armor.
You have armor already, sure.
Mhm. Um, yeah, I like this. I will throw this without the bonus, but to be honest, I don't usually have to worry about it because you will often have less life than your opponent. Um, I'm historically a fan of saying, and it's still largely true, I think, Imogene is winning if she has 1 or 2 less life than the opponent. Like,
Okay.
she's ahead in life at that point
Okay. And
because
because
yeah.
she's able to hit hard now.
Yeah, it turns on this and it turns on a transformation, that we'll come to next, which says you are advantaged if you have less life than your opponent.
Right.
Um,
And because she's a grappler, I assume that she has to suffer through the hell of grappler neutral, which means that she will often you don't need to try to have lower life than your opponent a lot of the time.
yeah, you're gonna have lower life a lot of the time by little amounts, and then you'll hit for a ton, and
Yeah.
you'll be ahead for a bit, and then they'll make up that
So
that value, chip away, and then you'll hit for a ton.
right. Okay.
Because that's the other thing, right? Is that most grapplers are going to be worried as they're like, okay, life is low. I could take lethal before I hit back for lethal. Like I can hit you for 8s, for 9,
Right.
and but I can do it slow, and then I'll take lethal first. Your opponent is like within threat of lethal at 10 life,
Right.
right? So like you can sit there and go, okay, you know, maybe we trade, but I'm hitting for 8, 9, 10 damage. Like, are you sure you want to risk trading with me?
Right.
Are you sure you're going to try to outspeed me? Like,
The late game for some characters is both players have 3 life. The late game for some characters is both players have 10 or 11 life.
yes,
Okay,
and
Emogene is
it's
in
not
is in the latter category.
exactly like it's not even hard for you to hit. It's not hard for you to hit for 7. It's not particularly hard to hit for 8 or 9 or 10.
Right.
Um, like I'm showing you the 7s. We'll count up from there. Well, we won't actually because I'm going to go over transformation. But there's a lot of numbers in this kit. A lot of red
Yeah,
numbers, good numbers.
absolutely. Now, D, I've also noticed that you have at this point advocated for, and I'm sure we'll go into this in a bit, but you have at this point advocated for 2 really, really strong EX attacks on a
Hmm.
character who is wild swinging for a lot of their offense and doesn't have an ability to cheat in EX attacks.
Hmm.
So at some point, I'm going to be throwing some attacks at range 2, like Guilty Pan, like Holy Warding, just because I'm throwing my offense at range 2 a lot with wild swings.
Hmm.
Um, I obviously can't always get this. Obviously, just when it's a wild swing, because it works a lot of the time, just one card will have to
Uh,
suffice.
yes, I will say if one of these comes up as your first, well, so transformation considerations here.
Hmm.
If one of these is your first wild swing, like as in you look at it and you're like, all right, I haven't said a wild swing yet. I'm looking at it.
Right.
Um, if you don't have this transformation, uh, add it to your gauge. This is why the boost.
Oh.
Yeah, you may transform a card from
Oh.
your gauge.
Okay.
So this is the like, oh, you were being aggressive, and it almost cost you an important transformation. Well, no, actually, it didn't.
It didn't
Like,
because I have this boost. If I like, you're sad if you both of them are on top of your deck and you accidentally just banked 2 or something is you banked one and then swung with the other one and whiffed or something. But that's luck, right? That'll happen sometimes.
it can be awkward, but like you have ways to fix all of your possible awkwardness. That's the what one Imogene has no speed boosts and yet can be consistent against virtually any opponent because she has all the necessary tools to work. I'm not going to turn this into an hour long praising Imogene thing, just explaining how she works. Anyway,
Right.
but like I mentioned touch divinity. I mentioned Trixie Node was the second easiest way to set a touch divinity. The easiest way is desperate prayer. The boost sets up the attack, or rather the tech.
Right.
So
You
because
just
you look
you
at the
just
top 3, you put them back in any order,
right.
and now you know what's on top of your deck, and so you'll draw for end of turn. Keep that in mind. But if you have 2 touches of divinity, then cool. You boost one, then set the other, and
Set
murder them.
set the other,
Yeah,
invalidate it, and then blow them up.
yeah. Like that is an option. It's actually something I don't generally recommend doing because you can probably be doing better things with your time, and I find that I'm going to be like I shouldn't be using that for the look at the top 3. I should be using that to transform a card and then gaining the additional side benefit of looking at the top 3.
Right.
Um,
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. But however, we still do have the issue of advocating for an EX attack on a character who wild swings from their
Mhm.
deck a lot. I assume then that either you are sculpting a hand in order to get these things by changing cards, by looking for these particular combinations, or you're just not playing them every game because you really might just wild swing them, and well, now you can't do the EX anymore.
So it's sculpting, but it's not going to take as much work as you're suggesting, or I should say, not as much concentrated work, because much of the game is grappler neutral. Like you are in neutral hell, marching toward your opponents gradually,
Right.
and over the course of that, you are spending some cards and you're keeping others. You will be building a hand, and you'll be keeping these cards,
Okay.
and you'll be
And
throwing away most other cards.
and the so I'm not going to be throwing that many cards that over the course of a game as attacks because I hit so hard.
Right.
So the few there's actually like it would require Guilty Pain to be in pretty specific positions in my deck for me to actually lose it and fail to get the wild swing, because I'm actually going to be drawing a fair number of cards in neutral just by playing boost and walking towards my opponent.
Yeah, like just because you'll have to, you'll
Right.
spend turns, and then when your opponent strikes on those turns, right, you'll be wild swinging to lose the strike most likely, but
Right.
you'll be wild swinging because why are you losing a strike from hands? And then maybe you bank one in your gauge and you have to look for touch divinity later. Um, maybe you don't. If you end up having to bank two, then that's one of them is forced because you only need one engage. If you end up like banking one and then flipping touch divinity twice, okay, that's pretty sad. But you still didn't spend any resources from hand. You're still capable of playing the game.
Okay.
Like you didn't get your awesome thing. That's fine. You have a reshuffle. You'll get it later.
Okay. So
Um,
I have more access to these EX attacks than I think I do for a wild swing oriented character, but I do have to just contend with the deck sometimes.
yeah, and it's going to take a while, right?
Okay.
Like you're not you're not you're not likely to dig for these EXs. You're likely to accumulate them gradually.
Okay.
Um, and that's kind of fine with you because you are not going to die quickly. Like besides, a little bit of printed armor, what you actually have is this transformation and the next transformation, which we'll come to in a minute,
Okay.
which allows you to regain some of the life you're spending. So this is when you spend one or more gauge. To clarify, the wording is a little bit awkward. Whenever you spend one or more cards from gauge to pay a cost. So this is gauge or force, as long as you're spending cards from gauge.
Right. In a strike, out of a strike, anytime.
Yeah. The modern template would probably be when you spend one or more cards from gauge.
Right.
But yeah, you gain
Right.
one life. That's important because it's a one life total, but it is
Not
each time.
yeah, not one life per card
Not
from
one per
gauge
card.
spent, but one life per instance of expenditure.
Yeah. So like
Okay.
if you wild swing Hand of Judgment and you pay 2 gauge, you gain a life.
Yep.
And then, you hit, you pay a gauge, you gain a life.
Right. Okay. Okay. You could have multiple sources of expenditure in one turn, then you gain two, but
Mhm.
2 gauge does not equal 2 life. That makes sense.
Yep. But yeah, so like that's some life gain, and especially what this will do is this is the neutral life gain, where like you're spending force. Well, you're going to spend one card from gauge to gain a life, and one or more cards from hand as you're walking.
Right.
Like you need to walk 2 spaces, cool. Gain a life, spend a card from hand,
Spend a
draw
card
one
from
card from
hand.
hand. Your hand is neutral, and you win up a life.
You went up a life.
Um,
Sure. Okay.
now it's probably a life that you spent earlier, but who's quibbling? Like the point is that it will give you the sustain when you need it because you spent it when you didn't need it.
Sure.
Um, All right, now that is obviously a trade off, right? Like you spent to gain, and you're spending the other to gain what you spent. Um, this isn't. This transformation says when you set a wild swing, gain a life.
Period. You're
Period.
not spending anything.
Yep. Um. In the parry meta of season 2, this is the parry. People hate this card. They will try to take it away from you. They should. That's correct. Getting this transformation in play early means that your effective life goes from I don't know, probably more than 30, honestly, but like your effective life goes from whatever it was to another +6 or +10.
Right. Because you're going to be wild swinging a
Because
lot.
you're going to be wild swinging a lot, and note the timing, right? When you set a wild swing, before setting a wild swing, you can
Yes.
spend one and then gain one, and just gain a gauge every strike.
Oh wow. Yeah. Okay. So you're going resource positive on something that you're going to be doing anyway, or you're just
Or
like
you're life
I'm cool with
positive.
this, and
Yeah,
I just get life. Okay.
yeah. This is free value. It's phenomenal. And I haven't even talked about the other half of it, which is when the opponent sets a wild swing, you gain +1 power. So once again, 7 is nice, but we can hit bigger numbers. And if you're wondering, well, what if they just decide never to wild swing? We'll come back to that.
Okay.
But yeah, so as far as the life economy goes, right? You can gain life whenever you set a wild swing. This transformation is amazing. People will try to deny it, and they should. This is a great thing to have in your gauge so that you can transform it with Desperate Prayer. Because it's going to be a lot harder to get it out of your hands effectively. People will try not to lose this attack, and they should. Like don't knowledge check people don't knowledge check people, right? Like don't play the thing assuming that they don't know unless you're very sure they don't know, or you just are playing the cheeky side of the mix-up, because playing this is very risky. Now that said, if you play this and you initiate and you run into a sweep, let's look at the actual attack. Sorry, I'm jumping around, but this is sweep, right? It's 1 of 3, 2, 6. Wait a second, what's this power value?
Yeah, that's lower than 60.
Yeah, that's not sweep. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. If your opponent initiates with sweep and then you play this is better than sweep.
Right.
Right. So before +1 power for each point of damage you've taken, and then as a bonus, a hit effect that lets you spin for extra power. That's you doing math to decide if you need to put them in range of lethal. That's not really anything else.
Yeah,
this card isn't going to stun.
Right. Yeah, or at least it's not going to stun. It's not going to stun your opponent's attack from hitting you.
Right. Not very likely anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. If you care about reactive stun, maybe, but I recently I had a lesson with Blue on Baiken, Hiragi. Like this is a really scary defensive option that actually kind of cares about losing speed ties.
Yes, cares a lot about it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like the only way that this stuns your opponent when you initiate is if you do the full +5, and then you can spend 2 to stun focus.
Right.
Don't expect that to happen often.
Yeah. Otherwise, you'll just have to content yourself with a very consistent defensive card shape that looks a lot like sweep, which is pretty strong.
Yeah, like that's pretty good. Numerically, it's like it trades up by 1, so its effective power is generally lower than sweeps unless your opponent initiates sweep. It's pretty dangerous to initiate with, because if they cross out or dive over, you're extremely sad.
Right, and if they sweep you, you're still pretty sad.
And you're still pretty sad if they sweep or if they focus. But on the bright side, if you hit them, you do get this transformation, and that's a ton of value.
Right.
So like that's a risk you may want to consider taking sometimes. I usually wouldn't, but if you lost 1 copy somehow, like you already replaced a card, it was the second wild swing, your opponent stunned it with spike or something, and you go, okay, well, 1 is in my discard, the other's in my hands. At some point, I'm gonna have to try to land this.
Yeah, because you can't do any gauge shenanigans in order to get it out with Desperate Prayer at this point, because it's no longer on top of your deck.
Yeah, so it's like at that point, you probably want to try to land this attack at some point, because the alternative is waiting for reshuffle to actually secure it, and that's you want this a lot sooner than that.
Right,
you want to get as much value out as you can.
Blood Administration is too important for that.
It's so valuable.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, if you do find that you want to land this attack, it might be best to be at range 1, where your opponent can't cross away, right? And then, if they know about the card and they're they are aware that Blood for Blood is the card they want to not get hit by, that is a great time to make sure that they don't get to decide what they play. Here's a boost.
Oh. Yeah. This is Scramble with extra stuff.
It's Scramble with after gain advantage. I will say it doesn't cost gauge. It often costs 1 gauge and 1 card from hand, right? Because you're often going to spend 1 gauge to gain 1 life. You want to spend
gauge in order to get Corrupted Power, sure.
Yeah, probably. But maybe it'll cost 2 cards from hand. It depends on the situation. But yes, so they set a wild swing, which if you have this already means that you have +1 power on top of whatever else is going on.
Yep.
If you don't have this, it often improves your chances of landing it, because most of a deck might lose to this in situations where they are saving the card in their hands to beat it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, sweep is a consistent enough attack shape that characters are specifically trying to beat it. It's not something that loses randomly very often.
Yeah. It is riskier at range 2, where dive, cross, and spike all cover it. So that's why I said you probably want to actually do it at range 1 and not range 2.
Right.
And then, regardless, at range 1 especially, like, you're not going to get stunned, which means that you'll have advantage, that whatever happens during this strike, you can then deal with the consequences.
Right, sure.
That's if you really needed to get Blood Administration into play, there's a backup option to do that. You would much prefer to transform it from hands by discarding one, playing the other, or from gauge because you managed to bank it at some point. Hand is the best, but like I said, if your opponents have parry, if your opponent has parry, the boost that says name a card, they discard it, they will be parrying this.
Right.
And okay, that means at some point you'll have to do something else to get it into play.
You'll have to land it somehow. So and
Mhm.
because I've had some lessons both with you and some other people on season 2 characters, Seventh Cross characters before. And this is kind of like a common sentiment when you're talking about like Joffrey doing a compulsive purification strats. Like, do not throw that card if you don't, or the Remulus transform that was so impactful that like you will not play that attack unless you are absolutely sure it's going to land because you need to hit it. Because you're
Mhm.
Emogine, you're going to be wild swinging a lot. You really can't 100% guarantee that you won't lose one
Yeah,
half of the EX transform for this.
yeah,
That's kind of what Desperate Prayer is for all of these attacks.
yes, yeah. That's
Okay,
kind of the you have a little less control than most, and you do want to wild swing, and you do want to be aggressive. You can't afford to just bide
turtle.
time.
Right,
You know, um, like you'll be spending a lot of downtime because your opponent's going to be running away from you, but um, you will not be spending time building your engine. You will be collecting your engine as you go.
right,
Um, and yeah, as a result of that, like Desperate Pair, you need. It's a great way to go. Okay, look at the top three, decide what the most useful order is. Keep in mind that you'll draw for in a turn, and then consider whether you want the top card to be the top card. Because remember, if your opponent strikes, you get a choice of which of the next two cards comes out.
right,
Um, and then if but yeah, you'll want to be able to transform a card from gauge because if one of these is in your gauge, then you're gonna have a hard time with the other one. And they're all high value. Like these
right.
are awesome.
Sure. So
Uh,
so because you are going to be wild swinging, you don't really have the luxury of playing explicitly for EX transforms some of the time.
mhm,
So Desperate Prayer is a way to kind of shore that up. But
mhm.
like it sounds like other than blood ministration, like all of these are high value. But if you were going to EX transform one, or if you were going to try to, if you could stack your deck in any order to prevent whiffing an EX transform, you would prefer to have EX transformed blood ministration to any of these other cards. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Well, look at the stat lines, right? What does EX Blood for Blood do?
I mean, loses to sweep or loses to even sweep on defense now.
Pretty much, right? Like
Yeah,
it does nothing special. It doesn't prevent die from beating it. It doesn't prevent cross from beating it, which are the two things you care about the most.
right.
I guess if
And
you're initiating, it prevents Spike from beating it, but you were hopefully at range one anyway.
right,
Like so, yeah. But you can EX these to make them on curve or above curve, which means that these can become attacks that are unbeatable anyway.
right,
So like holding these for EX is not different from making sure that you can get the transformations.
right. Okay, you're just choosing to deal 7 or more damage when you get the EX transform.
Exactly. Whereas this
Okay,
one, hold for the EX because you can transform from hands. Playing this attack EX is usually worthless.
understood. Okay,
Yeah, it's also kind of an anti-synergy, right? For each point of damage you have taken
you
is
take
going to be
less
minus
damage
one.
from the armor, of course.
Yeah, like it's plus one, but it's also minus one. So it's like, that feels a little weird.
Right,
Don't really want that. Um, but yeah, so yeah, if you have both of this, you transform from hands, without a doubt. If it's in your gauge, you transform from gauge without a doubt.
right.
If you have to try to land it, I'd recommend using Evil Within. Um, Last transformation.
Yep.
So this is the one I think actually people would be more inclined to see as free value, but it's the one that is less important than blood administration. I would actually say this is the least important transformation. So the attack it's on is on curve. Uh, it is on curve at speed 6, which means it's hey a thing they can't cross out of. We've been wanting one of those, right?
Yep.
Um, Forces a discard, which as most grapplers know means that you are diminishing their ability to answer your mix-ups, which is nice. Uh, yeah, 4 power, whatever. Not amazing. 7 power is pretty good though. This might be 7 power. It might be 9 power actually, but we'll assume that's probably 6 or 7 power most of the time. Um, or it could just be 4 power. Who can say?
Right.
The transformation though, when you set a wild swing, same rules as the other stuff, right? Uh, Hits if you have less life than the opponent, gain 2 life. This is the biggest reason that if you have one less life than your opponent, you actually don't, right? Like you're ahead. Um, But yeah, this so this is free value and it's 2 life. The reason that I think it's the least valuable of these, firstly, it has a condition, right? It's not a hard condition to meet, but it has a condition. The others kind of don't. Um, Secondly, and most importantly, probably honestly, this does not stun anything. It doesn't make breakpoints happen. This is +1 power. This is +2 power. This can keep you alive over a threshold that matters. Um, this can do that, but only if you're faster.
Only if you're faster, right?
Yeah, like this requires you to hit and thus heal. Um, and there's some amusing stuff that can happen with hit timings here, where notably hit timing, hit timing, hit timing.
Right.
You can in fact holy warding with less life, gain +2 power, then hit, gain 2 life, then spin to gauge, heal even more, +2 power, and just
And
have a 8 damage holy warding, right? But
sequence it such that you are never below a life threshold uh, at the time it matters for during the strike, right? So
above, but yes.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, above.
Yeah, but like
Okay,
that, just do that in the order that is sensible. Be aware of all your hit timings because once you have all your transformations out, you've got 2 extra hit timings you got to pay attention to on wild swings.
right, right.
Um, yeah, but this transformation, although useful and certainly valuable if you have it and if you're landing attacks ever, which hopefully you are.
Yeah, hopefully.
I consider to be the least impactful.
It's just upside. Okay. So, do you between these two cards that gain life when I gain life ever really, um, I recently had a lesson with Coroner on Taisei, and one of the things that they
Mhm.
imparted to me on that lesson was that a lot of times, because they're a front side Taisei player, a lot of times, they think of life gain as another opportunity to use your ability.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Um, is it sounds like uh, Emogine is using her life gain to not die, not to build more gauge or something like that by moving a wild swing into gauge or something. This is
Mhm.
for survivability purposes. It's not a your life is not an ability initiator. Am I thinking about that right? Or an
I would
ability
say so.
enabler?
Yeah, I would say so on the premise that like you're using your ability anyway,
Right,
right? And you're probably not going to be down to 1 life at any point. You might, and in that case, okay, yeah, you need to heal to gain life, but also if you're at 1 life, you have maybe 1 strike left, right? Like
right.
that, but that's the only time that you can't afford to spend life, and it's often the only time it's going to be like at 1 life is the only time you'll even consider looking at the top of your deck saying this makes no sense, and then not adding it to gauge. Um,
Because then you would die.
yeah, because
Right.
it's not legal. It's not, you can't spend your last point of life,
Oh, okay.
um, but yes, but yeah, it's like the only reason not to throw away or throw spend a life to throw into gauge a useless card is because you literally can't.
Right.
Generally speaking, it's going to be worth more to you to spend that life and gain that gauge, and that's in part because that gauge is a resource that is now stocked that you can get back later as life and still use for something else, right?
Okay.
Because
Yep.
this is not equivalent exchange. This is you spent a life to gain a gauge, you spent a gauge to move and gain a life.
To do something else. Yeah.
Yeah, or change cards or whatever.
Right.
Validate an ultra, but like you spent it or gain +2 power. You spent it on something else and then you get the life back.
Right.
So like it is a net positive to have that interaction. Um, Not neutral. Um, Sorry. Does that
Yeah, no,
make sense?
that makes total sense. So now that we've talked about all four transforms, it sounds like the kind of like if you somehow had all four of them in your gauge and you had the ability to desperate prayer any of them, the order you would use. I know that that's probably not a
Go
realistic
for it.
situation, but the order that you would use would you would want blood administration first most of the time, and then probably one of these two, and then this fourth one. Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Without a doubt. And it's often going to be pay-in over warding because between the two, right, I can land either of these attacks. Warding is a little bit likelier to land, and it is better delta. This is
Right.
4 power, maybe 6 power, 1 armor. This is effective 3 power.
Right.
So, like,
Right.
I want to play Holy Warding more, so I'll probably prefer Guilty Pay-In.
Sure. That makes
But Blood
sense.
Administration is first. Yeah.
If you were deciding to play the Hecatoncheir in this game, are any of your transforms like absolutely like I know that some characters in Seventh Cross like they can exceed too early. They can kind of run out of like they can burn their
Mhm.
engine out by trying to flip too early. Are any of these transforms like strictly necessary for this line of play to be enabled, or is it really just that you're using Touch of Divinity
Well,
when you're
for
using Hecatoncheir?
sorry, one sec. Well, for players who aren't me, for players who actually want to play the Hecaton Care, right, and
Yeah,
make good use of it, um, this is key because this says you can initiate with +2 power basically at will,
all the time.
right,
Right,
all the time with no drawback. I mean, I say it costs gauge, but hopefully you build some gauge,
right.
like, and if you're hitting, you're getting gauge. So, like this, without this, it's probably not even worth it to exceed. Um, like even if you want to do the Hecaton Care. But if you have the other 3 transformations, this is still probably the one that you want. Sorry, I'm tabbing the wrong place. This
No,
one.
it's all good. It's
Um,
all good.
but yes, this one is actually like less significant to Hecaton Cure. Um, it synergizes with this transformation. It synergizes with what your character does in a game plan sense, but it does not synergize explicitly with the Hecaton Cure.
With
Um,
your thing. So you're happy about this, but you really, really want Guilty Pan transformed.
yeah, I think that's essential. Um, this is a good transformation that most people probably value more than I do, because I'm more excited about breakpoints, and that's just value. But
Right.
but yeah, so I would say Guilty Pain is up front. This is also good, of course, because you're expecting to initiate with Wild Swings at no penalty, and it's more free value, right?
Right.
Like it's just you're initiating a strike, you gain a life, cool, and you also probably have +2 power, cool. Um, there is like a theoretical risk of burnout where you exceed and you've got this set up, but then you run out of gauge. I find this risk personally to be purely theoretical because of how much damage you have at your disposal.
Right. You're either
Uh,
going to run out of gauge first, or your opponent's going to run out of life first, and the rate of exchange is pretty heavily skewed in your favor.
yeah, like the only reason you run out of gauge is you're in exceed mode and you have to spend your gauge as force catching up with them in neutral hell, right?
Right.
And then you don't have an easy way to rebuild gauge because you don't have your basic ability.
Right. Okay. Sure.
Because once this is gone, there's no free gauge.
Right.
Yeah.
And hopefully you've already transformed one of these, so if you do land another one, you get to build gauge that way. But it's
Hmm.
still like you're not hoping to land that many hits. You're hoping to hit really hard. You're not going to build that much gauge.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, my main source of gauge is Imogine is her basic ability. I get more gauge from
Right.
that than I do from strikes
From
by a
from
significant
hitting with
margin.
normals, from hitting with untransformable cards. Okay.
Hmm. Um, yep. Okay. Last attack.
Yes, please.
Hey, it's sweep again. It's funny how I have a speed 4 sweep, a speed 4 sweep, a speed 2 sweep, and speed 2 sweep. Um,
Yeah, you got a lot of
sweep,
sweeps.
sweep's a good card.
Yeah,
Oh, and this, which is, it's like a sweep, but it's the
it,
biggest sweep.
it's kind of sweepy. Yeah, it doesn't hit at range one. Other than that, it's pretty strong.
Yeah, it's a projectile sweep. It's a
Yeah.
range 4 anti projectile. I guess you die, but anyway. But yeah, so 1 and 2, 5, 2. 5 is less than 6, but still respectable. Also, of course, 5 might be 7, or 8,
Yep.
or 10, but
Or 10.
yeah, it can be a lot of numbers, but we'll start with 5. Before, if you were hit, you may transform a card from your hands or
Mm,
close 2.
okay, that's awesome.
Um,
Both honestly for imaging, both of those are awesome.
both awesome. So this is actually like the hardest decision you'll usually have to make in regular play, other than what force do you pay, which is hard for everyone, is when you get hit and your opponent, pushed with grasp or retreated with cross, and
Right.
now you'll hit them if you close, but if you don't close, you get a transformation.
Yeah. So you
Um,
build gauge and get a positioning you want, or you get a transform.
yep,
Ooh.
and that is hard. Um, generally, if it gets me ministration, I get ministration. Um, like I find this usually to be valuable enough to be worth it. That I'm like, all
Okay.
right, I will transform this, and then I will pay the hard way to come back in,
Right.
and I'll accept that I didn't hit you for 5 or even for 7 because I got blood for blood, um,
Because this
or blood
transform
ministration.
is that important to you.
It's that impactful. It's so good.
Okay. Okay.
Um, that's I mean, that obviously depends on how early in the game it is, right? If we're both less than 10 life, then this is not gonna get me all that much.
Right.
It might still get me some, but I'm probably not going to trade a 5 power hit for it. Um, but yeah, but early game, yeah, I'll trade a 5 or 6 power hit for getting blood administration in play.
Right.
It's
And
also why I'm willing to lose the sweep with it occasionally.
and compared to Blood for Blood, also your other 2-speed sweep, like this one also has like synergy on defense because you would like to be hit before you use
Yep.
it. But
Yep.
comparatively, like if I throw this and I hit with it, and my opponent throws sweep and I trade down, I hit and I traded down. It's not crushing the way that 1 to 6 is crushing, but also I didn't get a transform.
Right.
So it's
Yep.
still tough.
Yeah, and I normally wouldn't want to initiate with Martyr's Lash, partly for that reason, where it's like, okay, if you lose the speed tie, it sucks. Also because there's a lot of value packed onto this card, not just in the transformation, but also this boost. Because as I mentioned
Mm,
before, this card is your movement.
all of
All
it,
of your movement is
both
this
sides
close
of it.
to
Yeah,
and this advanced 3 or 4.
right,
Um, and that is a 1 force, which is often a spin engage to gain a life. Advanced 3 or 4, which often means your opponent put you in the corner you need to out, or your opponent, you know, went to Timbuktu somehow,
right,
and you need in face. 3 or 4 is actually often awkward, especially like turn 1, right? You're like, this doesn't put me in range 2. I don't usually play this on turn 1. I usually pay 2 force to go to range 2, and
right.
then I wait until we're in a situation where I need to make more space. But 3 or 4 will still often put you at 1. Don't corner yourself, by the way.
Sure.
It will often put you at 1, and that's sane. If it consistently put you at 2, this would be ridiculous.
Right.
It puts you at 2 if your opponent is so far away that you needed it. Um, like at that
So,
point, your
so
reward for dealing with being at range 5 and giving up Martyr's Lash is that you got to come back in.
right.
Um,
So don't play it if you are going to end up if you're forced to end up at range 1 with it. Don't bother with it. Just play some other advance or spend cards to get in instead. You want to end
oh,
at range 2.
if the 3, yeah. So that's my general thought. It's like if you, yeah, if you're here, right, 3 puts you here, 4 crosses up.
Right.
Probably you can just pay, like, you're already paying 2 cards. You're paying this and a force. You can probably
Right.
pay 2 other cards and go to your favorite range.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
That
but
works
yeah,
better for
if
you.
your opponent is out here, then you can go to range 2, or out here, then you can go to range 2, and that's
Right.
considerably better.
Right.
I,
And
I think it is okay if you are cornered somehow to use it to jump out, even if you end up.
at range 1.
Um, there we go. Sorry, I had to figure out where you would be, but yes. Here,
Right.
it's like, okay, you end up with your back to the wall. This will get you back in. That's probably fine. But
Right.
in most situations, yeah, you can go to range 2 instead of range 1 at a cheaper cost. So do that.
Sure.
Uh,
And you mentioned obviously don't corner yourself when you use this with the advance effect. Obviously no one likes being cornered because it makes like crosses not work to dodge things and stuff. But really for Emogine, it's more about like if you're over here, you've given your opponent way more room to run away from you, right?
yeah, like you're the grappler, and instead of them having, like by default, right? They run away. They now have 4 spaces to retreat.
Right.
But if this happens, they have 6 spaces to retreat,
Right.
and that means you'll spend that much more time and effort getting them away from you, and you'll take probably that many more hits in the process.
Sure. And
Um,
so you started or earlier in the lecture you mentioned that you really prefer to be in these spaces for that exact reason.
exactly. Yes.
Okay, so you
Yeah.
want mid board for as much as you can have it.
Yeah. And if you use this to corner yourself, you just used your best tool for getting out
Your
of the
movement
corner
boost. Exactly. Yeah.
to corner yourself, which is
Right.
not a great idea.
Yeah, yeah. That's really, really rough. Gotcha. Okay.
Mhm. All right, there is other text in this card. It says, the next time you spend life, uh, gain that much life and discard it. So there is an upshot here. If, especially early on, you use it to go to range 1, what you're doing is you are telling your opponent, hey, I'm holding EX Guilty Payout. Because this now costs 0
Yep.
and hits for 7.
Yep.
And if you actually have EX Guilty Payout, honestly, probably fine. Go for it. Like,
It's hard enough to like what are they gonna do?
exactly.
Like
It's a what are they gonna do? Are they gonna run to range 4 on the other side of you? Really? Like, are they gonna pay that much? No, they're not.
yeah.
Um, and you have this nonsense. But if you have this nonsense, you are going to find a time to hit it at some point. So it's not that it's special because of this boost. This boost just means it costs 3 less life, which is
Right.
nice.
Which is cool, but it also is very telegraphed.
It's extremely telegraphed. Yeah. If they have a
Okay.
way to beat Guilty Pan, which most characters won't have an easy way to beat the EX, but if they do have a way to beat it, they'll see it coming.
Right. Okay.
Um, yeah, you should expect this usually to be, hey, if I gain a gauge next strike with my ability, it doesn't cost me anything. And sometimes, hey, if I end up with blood for blood, cool, it has +2 power at no cost.
And no cost.
Um,
Sure.
but most of the time, this is just 1, maybe 2 life value, not 3.
Right.
Um,
Right.
mhm. Yeah, this is also a 3 value, of course. Um, well, yeah, that's one of those. This would have been worth it anyway. Spending 3 less does not change when I play the card or how I play the card. It just means they stood at range 2 when I had this boost in play on my turn, or they initiated with something that lost a hand of judgment range 2. This was not a good decision. They should not have done that.
Right. Sure.
Um,
You weren't like, oh, thank God, now that I'm not taking three now that I'm not losing 3 life anymore, I can play Hand of Judgment.
no, you were gonna play it. You were 100%
Yeah.
gonna play it anyway, if it
Yeah.
made sense to play it, which you would find out after reveal because you're Imogene.
Yes.
Um,
Okay.
well, that's actually because it's Exceed, but Imogene is specifically sculpted to work well with it. So,
To work well with that. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
mhm. All
So
right.
so
So yeah, mhm.
I was gonna I like as a recap of what we've done. So we've talked
Go for it.
all the
Go for it. Yeah.
transform boosts, we've talked all the specials at this point, and we've sort of mentioned the ultras and their boosts, but what else do we have?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the ultras a little bit more explicitly. So yeah, 276. It also has 4 guard. In the unlikely event your opponent has some sort of super fast poke at range 2 that doesn't change positioning.
Yeah.
There are a few of these, but not a lot. Um, what this mostly does is it says, "Oh, your opponent had this card shape. Well, you can still
Right.
respond with this."
Right.
Um, and you take the hit, and then you hit back for 7, and that's fine. Um, but yeah, so 276, pretty good. 2 gauge, also great because that means you're only being inefficient by 1 if you want to spend a gauge to gain life, or if this was a wild swing, 3 life. Usually, I will prefer to pay the life instead of the gauge if I have, you know, if I actually have 2 gauge. Um, that's not a particularly like strong claim. Do whatever you think makes sense. I have legitimately never really done the math on what the value proposition there is. I just go, hey, 2 gauge is useful for things that I can spend gauge on, like this. Um, 3 life is useful for things I can spend life on, but I can get more life.
And
Getting more
you
gauge
also
will
have
be a little harder. Mhm.
you start the game with 30 life. You start the game with
So
0 gauge. That's a
exactly.
way higher number.
Yeah. I guess if I actually do the math, right? 3 life, 2 gauge. Well, 3 life is on paper 3 gauge, but it's 3 gauge over the course of 3 strikes.
Right.
Um, 2 gauge uh, could be 4 life because it's +4 power. I don't know. It's weird. I would generally say that gauge is more valuable to have accessible because it's a more flexible resource, right? Life only does
Sure.
so many things. Gauge does a lot of things.
Sure. You can't change
Um,
cards. You can't move with life. I guess you can kind of move with life because you're a grappler and that's what grappling neutral is. But I understand
indirectly,
your
but yeah,
point. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. But yeah, so like the math's a little weird, but because gauge is a flexible resource, I think you should value it more highly, and therefore, given the choice, most of the time, yeah, spend the life, not the gauge, keep the gauge.
Right.
Um, if you have the choice, which again, you'll only have the choice if it's a wild swing. This is a perfectly acceptable card to play from hands. um, both sides of this are amazing, but from hand, this is on curve 7 power. If you EX it, which I do love EXs as this character, I've made that abundantly clear. I probably still wouldn't EX this card very often because I could instead play it twice, and I'd like to do that instead.
Yep.
Um, I will usually prefer to, in fact, play it once this way and once this way, where I play this attack and hit for 7, maybe even during the same strike that I am playing this boost to gain advantage to force my opponent to hit, or to wild
Oh
swing.
God.
With the proper setup, by the way, this isn't 7, it's 8.
That's 8. Yeah.
Because they are wild swinging, so I have +1 power. So, hit for
But
8, gain advantage. Cool.
and
My turn.
and that other than maybe dealing with a DP or something, the big upside of EXing this would be to hit a breakpoint high enough to beat focus. Well, okay, you just did that.
Yeah, you just did that. Like, at a high cost, this is a 2 force boost. You're
Right.
still giving up both copies, but you're doing that in return for advantage, and if you had enough gauge to do this, then you probably paid some of that force from gauge, and, that's some life.
Yep.
Um, more life for the life engine. But yeah, so
Okay.
this card's amazing. This boost, by the way, is, like, maybe my favorite example of where Imogene, like, has exactly the tools she needs for exactly the problem she has, because she has no stat boosts like anywhere, but she's not weak against so-called set play characters who build up a bunch of boosts, because
Right.
this murders them. Where
Right.
they, like most characters who build up boosts, need to be able to capitalize them in a meaningful way. They don't just make everything in their deck that much better in every way. You can make them play things that don't make sense because you make them wild swing. Like characters who tend to rely on their boosts are characters who tend to have more situational attack shapes. Making them wild swing tends to make them hurt. This makes them wild swing, and also probably, unless things go horribly wrong, gives you advantage, which means that your boosts are gone, or their boosts are gone. Now it's your turn again. Like, cool. Not only did you probably win the strike in which they had their boosts, you are now probably winning the next strike because they have no boosts, and
They
it's your
have
turn.
no boost, and if they're a really, really boost heavy character, that means that they're not
Their
just
attack
weaker
quality
than
is
they were a
probably,
second ago, they're weaker
Mhm.
than you now.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
almost certainly.
Okay. Okay.
So that, yeah, like that's, yeah, it's amazing. It is useful in many other situations. It's useful most of the time. Honestly, it's just that it's expensive, right? It's like I don't tend to exceed a Secretary here. I do tend to use this to close the game, where my opponent thinks that they are safe because they have more than 10 life. Cool, hit for maybe 6 to 8 damage, gain advantage, do it again. They're dead.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah. You still have that the game is over. We are in a later stage of the game than you thought we were, just not from your exceed side,
mhm. Yeah,
or
because
rather,
this,
not for Touch of
not even
Divinity
not
and your
even from
exceed
Touch
side.
Divinity. Yeah, it's just because you can advantage chain, and
Right.
heaven help them if you happen to have two of these and the resources to play it twice, and the tools to use it. Now, if you're doing that, by the way, don't do it in a risky way. Do it with an EX that's not going to get stunned out by a wild swing. Do it with an on curve attack that's not going to, make sure you get your after. Make sure you get
Right.
your advantage.
Right.
But that means you can take multiple turns hitting for 6, 7, 8 damage, and they're dead. Like,
Right. Especially because you might be using this in order to diffuse a set play character. Remember that they do have boosts down when you're doing that. So be
yeah, yeah. Pay
careful of
attention
that.
to, yeah, yeah. Pay attention to what
But
you're up against.
right,
Yeah.
right. Okay. Um so both sides of this card are incredibly strong. It sounds like they are game closers in their own right.
Hmm.
Um what about, and we've talked a lot about Touch of Divinity just being an invalidator
Yes.
to get power on other things. How is it as an actual attack?
Uh, so it's deceptively, well, no pun intended, deceptively godlike, but extremely situational.
Okay.
So this is 4 gauge for 10 power. I have told you a lot of power numbers today. Most
Yep.
of them did not cost 4 gauge, and they weren't all that far off of 10 power. In fact, 10 was even a number that we have run into already.
Yeah.
Where you have the appropriate things in play, you can get there. 10 or 11 or thereabouts without spending 4 gauge. You'll instead spend about 1 gauge.
Right.
Maybe 2 or 3 if you count playing this boost to make the opponent wild swing and all that stuff.
Right.
Like you can add a lot of red numbers together without paying 4 gauge in a go. Um, However, if you're ever in a situation where this is unbeatable because your opponent ran out of things that beat it, they just don't have any dives, they don't have any assaults, they are cornered with the edge of the board, they don't have any projectiles that push you. Okay, fine, I guess go to town, right? Like it is a thing that says, oh, you're at the bottom of your deck and you forgot that I had this. I
Right.
guess you die.
Right.
Um, but most of the time, not going to be a thing. Also, most of the time, you will be spinning your gauge way faster than that. Like getting to
You
4
just
already
you
is a
just
tall
won't
order.
have four ever. Yeah.
Like if you had 4, it's probably because you were looking at how to pay for 2 copies of this or 2 boosts, or two of this attack or 2 of this boost or some combination of those. And then
Right.
you went, oh, I guess I have 4 gauge and touch divinity.
You
Maybe I
might
can
as
just
well.
kill them.
Yeah. And then you're like, actually, hold on. Can I check your discard pile real quick? And then you do the math, and you're like, all right, this works. This works fine too. I had another plan, but this
Yep.
works fine too.
Yep. Yeah, it does.
Okay.
It does have one other important function, which is that it is a stun immune button. So it works very well against things that would otherwise stun you, notably spike. Um, Range 3
Yep.
spike is pretty obnoxious, especially after you've exhausted your big dumb payouts, and now your deck is looking like a bunch of sweeps, or things that don't hit at range 3. Then yeah, Touch Divinity is a stun immune thing that works. It's the challenge of it is getting to 4 gauge and being willing to use it, especially if this is at all a risk.
Right.
Because most people won't assault into you when your deck is made of sweeps. Um, but still, they might dive you because dive beats
Sure.
all the sweeps at range 3, and this loses very, very hard to both of those options. Um, you probably gain a life, you probably have 3 armor, you're still losing hard.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, dive does 2 damage less because you're gaining life, but it also does 4 gauge worth of damage.
exactly. Yes, like
Yeah,
you
sure,
burned all that potential, and you lost touch affinity from hand, which would have been a +3 power boost, right?
right. And
Um,
or it would have been desperate prayer, which you also
or
really
Desperate
like to
Prayer.
transform stuff.
Yes, but you like transform stuff. If you don't need to transform stuff, it's perfectly fine to boost this just to set up the other touch divinity. But I will say, like, my use cases for this are using the attack, often in irresponsible and cheeky ways, but using the attack as an invalidator,
Yep,
using Desperate Prayer if I need to, and then paying Force. Like the last case of this card is to play the attack.
is the attack. Sure. Okay.
I'm more often going to prefer to pay 2 Force to move than I am to actually try to commit 4 gauge to playing the attack.
Got it.
Um,
Okay. Okay.
it just if you're in a position to play it and you have the resources to play it, it probably wins the game. But if you got there, you probably had other ways to kill them, a few times over.
Right.
Um, and that's Touch of Divinity. It's a very good attack that you will probably never play.
You
Um,
probably won't play it because you have other things to do. Interesting. Okay. So that's the specials and ultras kit. Um, any other like important combos or synergies that you want to talk about, or should we maybe look at the normals and what and how they change your game plan?
um, no, yeah, no, let's do that thing.
Sure.
All right. So notably, right, I've talked a lot about you are sensitive to cross.
Yes.
Um, Similarly, as a grappler, you have a cross, and even though it's an on curve range 2 button, you probably don't want to use it.
Sure.
Um, you have other on curve range 2 buttons that will work perfectly fine when played from hand or wild swing, depending on the situation. Play those. Save your cross because eventually you will need to boost to run back in, and then you have a way to do that.
Right.
Um,
Sure.
Using this boost means that you are spending one fewer Martyr Slash, which now means you can Martyr Slash at some point as an attack, and that's nice. Um, Cross catchers, things that you care a lot about, are limited to Martyr Slash, Holy Warding, and Touch Divinity, and only at range 1. At range 2, your opponent can cross, and if they initiate, they win. Be aware of that. Accept it. This is where you go. Okay, my hard decision is: do I play Martyr Slash for a transform, or do I take the loss, gain a gauge with my ability, wild swing some trash, grasp or whatever, and then next turn boost this to come back in because now they
To come in and now they're
get range 2
cornered and
again.
you're at range 2 again. Sure.
Yeah, and that decision I will essentially say I'm leaving to you. Like that is they're both sensible plays. If it's administration, I'll probably take it, but maybe you have 2 of these and you're going to transform that next, so you can afford to wait a turn. I'll leave it to you. Um,
Yep.
if you're in Timbuktu and you're getting hit by projectiles, it will be tempting to play this attack to close in. Don't do it. Wait, play the boost. Take your hit. Right. Um, the attack is worse at grappler movement than the boost is. Just lose the strike by some other means and then play the boost.
Right.
Um, but yes, the attack is close to if you're going to hit most likely, or if you have a follow up. If you have a follow up, that's another matter. But if that happened, you probably went to range 2. Um, so you're probably hitting. Anyway,
Right. Sure. And
yes,
but most of the time when you are at range 8 from your opponent, what you care about is raw number of spaces moved.
yes, most
Okay.
of the time,
Okay.
and the boost is better for that. All right. Here are now let's go through your as this will not surprise you in the least. Your favorite cards to have in your hand.
Yep. Yeah. Mulligan for these because you are wild swinging and you don't want to see them at range 2.
Yeah, these are very unreliable wild swings because you want to be at range 2 most of the time. They are not good. They are also incredibly bad when face up, no matter what range you're at most of the time. At range 1, you play a face up block, and your opponent goes, Okay, what?
What
Let me,
what
you
whatever
know,
I want.
yeah, like I can do anything I want, and it'll work just fine. Do I feel like diving for movement or crossing to go to this range so I can hit you with a projectile next turn? Yeah, they can do whatever they want. Even if they can't punish block per se, probably because you're at range 1 and not 2. At 2, they can spike. But anyway, then you're still letting them do whatever they want. It's not great. Um, Dive face up, almost certainly they have something to outspeed and beat it, right? It's pretty shocking if even at range 3, where dive is sensible, they can't beat it. At range 4, depending on what you have in play, they may well decide to duck in and then cross away next turn, or
Right.
just hit you with sweep. And honestly, that's not the worst for you because you're a grappler and you get in. But it's still unreliable, and most people will be able to outspeed it. Plus, at range 4, you're probably not initiating with a wild swing anyway.
Sure.
Like, why are you doing that? You should instead move in. Grasp. Fierce is a good boost. I like it. It's great. Adds power. Um, I almost always end up playing at least one Fierce as Imogene. This is perhaps excessive because I'm not really lacking for power, um, by any stretch of the imagination. But one Fierce means one Guilty Paon is 8, and
Yep.
8 is a number.
It
Um,
sure is a number.
yeah, it's Sun's focus, it's Sun's sweep, and because of that, one Fierce means that my threat threshold is magnified tremendously.
Right.
Um, even if I don't have the EX. If I have the EX, I probably don't bother with the Fierce. Or I do because I want to hit for 9 instead of 7. That's
Right.
hilarious. But
Well, but
um,
also, I mean, with the EX, this is incredibly consistent.
mhm,
So
yeah,
why not?
once you have a consistent attack, power is
Yeah.
value. Just gain more value during the next strike, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the risk is that when you spend turns setting up, your opponent has turns to get outs
Oh,
or do other
sure.
stuff. But if you're
Sure.
in an
Okay.
advantage position, right, then it's like, okay, cool. I can strike here. Or I can look at my hand and say, "I'm on top of this and boost this," and that's a viable decision.
Right.
You know, you don't wanna give them too much time. The turn that they get over here, then you probably wanna do something before they get further away.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
of course, I'm slightly infamous for overextending my advantages, right? Once I have +4 power in play, I go, but I could have +6 power in play."
Yeah. What if
It's
6 is a higher number than 4?
Yes, but as somebody who will often care about speed ties, as someone who will often be at a range where you're sensitive to losing to cross, be fairly initiate happy, like be pretty okay with initiating, uh, even in maybe even especially on front side. But yeah, this is still fine sometimes because of how much it does to your numbers. It does a lot. Uh,
Right.
this attack here, okay, sometimes you need on curve buttons, right? This is mostly if you're up against another grappler, right? This is if you're up against somebody else who is also throwing backbreakers, and they're going to be at range 1 and not 2. Because your range 1 is like fine. But your biggest stuff, your Hand of Judgment, your Touch of Divinity, your Holy Warnings. Well, Holy Warnings actually equal to Guilty Pan, but anyway, like your biggest stuff that you prefer to use that you're the most comfortable using does not work at 1. You still have Guilty Pan, potentially X Guilty Pan, and that's pretty awesome. Um, but it's probably on a value level worse than a typical grappler payout at their favorite range of 1. Because if you're up against another grappler, cool, right? Like you go up against Tager and you throw EX Guilty Pan, and he goes, "Great, I'll play just 1 card and then trade up because I played Crimson Punisher."
Right.
Um,
Because
and
she has that, like, this is the one time in the whole game that Tager gets to feel privileged.
right, it's like, okay,
'Cause-
I just I'm better than you at this range, and you decided to try to swing at me thinking that you were better than me. You're not.
right.
Um, you know, like he has 2 armor, 5 guard, 5 power, ignore armor. He's gonna trade up. You took 8, he took 5, or you played your sweeps, and sweeps are super safe at range 1, except he has a 7 power special that you can just play.
Right.
Um, so, like, if you're up against somebody who is dominant at range 1, yeah, you probably have to keep a grasp around, um, or, you know, at least one of grasp and chime in hands to just occasionally poke out a mid speed and say, "No, sorry, that wasn't actually as safe as you thought it was. I still have fast things, I just prefer not to use them."
Right. Okay.
Keep people honest. But that's what grasp is, right? It's your answer to the mix up, and it's everybody's range 1 poke. For you, that's basically all it is, in my opinion.
Okay.
The positioning it offers is often not going to be a thing, but if you do end up hitting it in a situation where how am I putting this? Sorry, whenever it hits, you're going to range 2. It's often not a decision, right? If you have the choice of putting them in the corner or out of the corner, you should put them in the corner, even if you're taking them from range 2 to range 1. In the corner is better for you unless you have a follow up right now.
Right.
Um, I should be explicit here. To me, these feel automatic because I play so many grapplers. But it's one of those. Corner them, that's good. Resource pressure on them, that's good. They have fewer options, that's good. Favorite range is great. It might be better than cornering them, but often not. If you need to decide between pulling them out of the corner or not pulling them out of the corner, probably keep them in the corner.
Makes sense.
But anyway, but yeah, other than that, you're not likely to be initiating with grasp ever, unless you have to win a speed tie against whatever your opponent is setting up. There's just not all that much value to it. You know, 3. What is this red number? It's 3. It's terrible.
That's not high enough.
That's not a 7. That's not a 6.
Yeah.
It's not even a 5.
Yeah.
It's
Neither,
terrible.
honestly, frankly, neither is this red number.
Yeah,
So
like what are these?
yeah,
These aren't
don't play
uncorrect.
those anyway.
Yeah, like and what are we doing here? Like there's just
Yeah.
nothing.
Those aren't
Terrible.
even numbers, D. Those are
Yeah,
letters.
yeah, those are letters. All right. And to be clear, just because I know my tone can be flat, like we're memeing. These cards are worth playing and they're worth having, but the value you're getting out of them is often going to be so low. When you play them as attacks, to be clear, parry's
Right.
great, fierce is great, run is great. But
Right.
playing these attacks is often so low value that you can afford to just to not even think of them as attacks most of the time, except for very specific situations where you go, okay, I need to not get eaten by this awful backbreaker. I guess I will play my cross and then move in later. Or I guess we'll play my grasp and then make up the damage difference later. Um, but yeah, like you hit so hard with your good stuff, and your stuff that hits so hard is good. You don't need to worry about getting value out of grasp.
Right.
Um, it's fine. Similarly, assault, which is exciting for a lot of characters, and I find pretty exciting. I like assault. EX assault is my favorite normal, right?
It's your favorite normal.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. When you put two of them together, it's now 6, so they can't cross out, and it gains advantage. So you get another turn. It's great. Way less exciting for you than for a lot of people, because it takes you to range 1, and while that's like fine, it's way cooler to be at range 2 where you're winning. Um, and often I feel that way even if it's not your turn next. Like turns are worth a lot, but if you are at the range where you are a dominant threat and you both know it, it's fine that it's your opponent's turn. They have to do something to stop this, and they will spend resources to do it.
Right.
So like I'll probably still, I'm me, right? I'll still play EX Assault if I get it, but I will not hold for it. I will spend this as force most of the time.
Okay.
Um,
We are now, however, outside of the range of these cards where this hits at range 2, right?
yes.
If
Oh
you
yes.
wild swing this,
I apologize. Yes, there's a transition point here where I'm like, here are the cards that you don't want to strike with, that you don't want in your hands, that you don't want to wild swing. Here are cards that are reasonable to wild swing, and I'm gonna talk about why you do or don't actually
right,
want to play them. Because yeah, if an assault comes up on your top deck, oftentimes it's reasonable. Go, okay, hey, that beats Spike, and they know my kit often loses the Spike. Sure, I'll play it. Like
right,
that's fine. I say often that's a misapprehension. People will often read your kit and think that you lose to Spike, but you have 2 speed 4 attacks that do usually beat Spike. So take care. Um, yeah, sorry, Holy Warding and Guilty Payam.
yep,
Um, like you do have 2 things that lose to Spike. That's important. 3 things arguably. Um, like this trades not all that badly, but certainly not all that well. But if you have less life, then these are both going to stun. So Spike is actually not that reliable into you. Um, and then of course they can just die if
they
they
could just
are at range
explode,
2.
right,
Yeah.
right,
But yeah, so like, okay, well, this is reasonable because it covers Spike, and I feel like they're playing Spike. Sure, go for it. It's fine. Um, it is certainly a thing that the opportunity cost of letting this drop into your gauge or just playing it as an attack and then watching as it gets stunned, like, is not a big deal. You were never going to use this boost ever in your
never,
life.
right, sure,
Um, and as far as things that you risked and then lost on, hey, it doesn't have a transformation. It's not Martyr's Lash. It's not an Ultra. Like the value you lost on trying to play assaults and then having it not work was extremely low because all you lost was assault, and it's
right.
not important to you.
It's like
Um,
this is like your favorite card to get crossed out of.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Like
like
given
you
you were
don't care.
losing to it, it's
Yeah,
fine. You know, um, and yeah, because the yeah, it does nothing for you other than what the attack does, and that is perfectly fine and good, and everybody likes it. But it's not special for you.
right, okay,
Um, So yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing that I will often not add to gauge because it beats enough things that I'm willing to have it be the mix-up that like component that I'm representing. Um, and if I'm initiating, it's also like, okay, this is now a thing where you can play across and beat it, but that's one fewer cross in your deck. So
right,
cool, go for it. Or give me advantage, and then you lose a sweep, which is one fewer sweep in your deck. But I like, you know, that I don't really beat the sweep there, but I at least can now take a step back and be at range 2. So
right.
like,
Or
it's
if you do happen to have, there's a couple things in your kit that work really really well at range 1. If you do happen to have them,
yeah,
cool.
then you can just come in and you're at range 1, and then you're in good shape.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, and it's a card that I'm like, okay, cool. If I replace this with a, you know, face up blood for blood, and then I get spiked, I'm extremely sad. So I'll just leave the assault. Like assault is fine.
right. Okay.
Um, all right. This card's awesome. It's sweep. I've talked a lot about how your deck is full of sweeps. Here's even
Yeah,
more sweeps.
there's yet
Um,
another sweep. This one even says sweep on
yeah, I know it's weird. They
it.
actually put it on the card. Don't have to memorize it, but But yeah, this one has 6 power, which is more than more asterisk than your other cards. I'll say it is more because your power bonuses work just fine on this.
Sure.
This could be an 8 power, a 9 power, an 11 power, whatever. Um, it is not good face up. Face up sweep loses to a decent number of things, as we talked about when we talked about Blood for Blood.
Right.
Right, like same loss conditions, and although the value may not be exactly the same, missing on a sweep, like, and it was not something your opponent even had to take a chance on, where they just go, "Oh, you are playing sweep, cool, get spiked."
Right.
Not great. Um, so I will always replace this if this is my visible top deck, because I'm expecting them to be able to beat it. Well, I say always, if they have a hand and they're not wild singing, right? But if they choose to strike, I'm looking at this in my top deck. I might respond with it, but if I'm initiating with it, I will replace it.
Right. Sure.
Responding is fine, because they don't know it. But initiating
And
face up, I don't want it.
yeah, they have already set their card when you're using your character ability by the time you've put your card down and revealed it to them.
Yeah. So like with all of these, it's if they've set their attack first, then you are making the decision of do I want to set this as a response, and I'll leave that to you.
Right.
But whether it's a good face up strike is the thing that is very specific to Imogene. And yeah, well, it's not very specific to Imogene, but it's specific enough. Um, it's the thing that you'll need to learn if you are not a player of face up characters.
Yep.
Face up sweep, not great. Um, it is actually not bad at range 1, with the notable caveat that if they're cornered at range 1 and they play dive next turn, you're in a worse position now.
Right.
So I don't love it at range 1, but I'll often accept it because I don't want to risk losing a better card on the next card. And it does cost them something because they pay a dive, which could beat my other sweep likes, and they don't hit. Like they played a card from hand, I played a card from deck, right? They spent something. I spent a turn, which is not nothing, but
Right.
I'm more okay with that. Sweep from hand, I'll happily play, just when I want to play a sweep from hands. It doesn't cost me any of my other sweep additional, opportunity costs. It just costs me light, which is nice, but I'm not exactly speed sensitive. You might have noticed the amount of guard in my cards.
Sure. Yeah, you're going to be trading a lot.
Yeah, so I'm don't usually need the speed, but if I want to, I can play lights. I as a
Probably to
player
catch a
value light,
cross.
but yeah, exactly. Like at that point, you go, okay, now, or if they are playing their own speed boost, and you go, okay, well, let me just up the ante here.
Right.
Like you can diffuse their boost with this, and then you boost light, and now you're up a boost, and their boost is gone, right? Like you got
Right.
choices.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, like light is fine for all the reasons light is normally fine. It's not like super amazing on you because you don't need it. You're already fast enough and you're already guardy enough on most of your stuff.
Right.
You're either playing guardy or you're playing fast. Your mid speeds are not exactly uh like how do I put this? Your mid speeds are not very risky. Like they risk missing. They don't risk getting randomly stuns. You don't have a
Sure.
0 guard mid speed. You have
Sure.
in fact a 5 guard, a 1 armor 5 guard, and a 4 guard.
You have
Uh,
remarkably safe mid speeds, but they can get crossed out. But so can this.
yes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I
All right.
have to
So
say
yeah.
that it says quite a bit about Imogene's general card quality. That this is probably like the most lukewarm I've ever heard you on sweep.
I know, right? Like, this is the normal that centers all of the normals.
Yeah.
It is the highest value proposition. It is the thing that matters the most to get hit by. Being able to not get hit by sweeps is the center of basic strategy.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a fine card. Play it if you want to. But it's only 6 power and it's just a gauge. You could instead have
Confirm a
significantly more than that.
confirm a transform while also hitting for more than that.
Yeah. Like I would rather hit for 7 than 6, right? Because it
Yep.
turns out 7 beats sweep.
Seven
Hey,
beat
go
sweep.
figure.
Yeah. And basic strategy in Exceed, as you just said, is avoiding getting hit by sweep.
Yeah, and if you are stunning it, then you're not going to get hit by it.
Exactly. Yep.
Yep. Uh, I have been known to play EX sweep, by the way. This is because if you set an EX, especially at range 2, they look at your specials. Most people do not look at EX sweep.
Right.
This is a slightly madman play because you are losing just as hard to cross as you ever were. But if they don't have the range to cross out, like if cross does not evade sweep, then yeah, you might just kill them.
Right.
And that's nice. It's tend to be good. Yeah, so sweep is good, but and then light is a thing that I value highly most of the time, especially on transformation characters, but which you just don't need most of the time.
Okay.
It's for answering your opponent's stuff. It's for pushing stuff over breakpoints based on how your kits match up against each other. Where you're like, oh, I thought on curve was enough. I thought above curve was enough. I actually need a little bit more than that.
Right.
So it's good at doing that.
Makes sense.
Um, Defend is a good boost. It adds 1 armor and 3 guard. This means that you lose slightly less. It means that your assault will help you close in. There's some other stuff in this card.
Nah,
Um,
I think
yeah,
you probably do and are pretty good at dealing with. I mean, you don't have ignore armor. I guess they can block you.
they can block you, and if you didn't have transformations, you might care. Um,
True.
but you got the transformation on your attack. If it didn't have one, you probably gain life on hitting, or if you didn't gain life on hitting, you probably paid a gauge and gained a life to make them spend more force. That you're, you know, almost resource neutral, and they're spending more resources.
Right.
Um, like, yeah, your engine runs as you are in combat. Them blocking is not really them participating in combat, so you are still doing everything you want it to do.
Okay.
Um,
Makes sense.
yeah. So face up spike also, by the way, not a good card.
Yeah. Loses
Um,
all sorts of things.
yeah, loses to probably most things. Loses to a decent number of wild swings. Like if you want to do this, the one nice thing I'll say about it is that a face up spike into a wild swing might work, but it probably won't get stunned, so you'll at least have advantage. Um, that's the at range 2, the thing that stuns it is dive. So you'll at least get your after,
Yep.
to be clear.
Yep.
But for the most part, I wouldn't recommend it. Um, like I don't even honestly recommend defend. I recommend spending this as force. This is kind of with assault. Except that assault I'll leave face up. Spike I won't.
Spike, you probably won't.
Uh,
Right.
yeah. But like I don't need defend either, right? It's like it's nice, but
Right.
do,
Well, I
do
mean,
I need it?
if light is to answer your opponent's speed boost, then defend is to answer your opponent's power boosts. Right.
Exactly,
Like
right.
like like 6 is
Yeah.
great. And oh no, I'm fighting Soul Bad Guy in a legacy tournament. Oh, I need more.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like that's the 6 was nice. Oops, he's gonna hit for 7 or 9. Let me
Yep.
yeah. And you can
Yep.
and that's what this is for. You usually won't need it, but if you need it, it's there.
Makes sense.
Um and if you need more than that additional defense, may I recommend stun immunity. Good luck on the gauge though.
Yep.
Um but yes. All right. Focus is focus. I think I started this lesson or
Yeah.
almost by saying
Really,
like,
really early. It's one of the cards that you will play like without any conditions on top of it.
yep, like I'm gonna be wild swinging. I'm going to be setting EXs from hands, or I'm playing focus
Yep.
because it just works. Um, Now face up focus is still not good, by the way. If they have any way to stun it, which is spike or character equivalents, but probably spike or dust if you're Kill to Go Strive player. Um, the face up focus is not good. If they don't have those things, face up focus is actually still great. Um, Worst that happens is probably they get away from you. You take a little bit of damage and you still get a card.
Sure.
And now you're at range and it's their turn, and that's not great. But like, okay, if that was going to happen, at least they dropped across, probably. But yeah, face up focus at range 1 is very very good. Loses mainly to dive, has the same loss conditions as sweep as I described, but anything that it would lose to that would hit it takes 2 less damage, and that's how to put it. That means you get to do more things later because the game will last a little longer for you. More survivability is nice. I will also very happily play focus at range 4 or greater when my opponent strikes because they have projectiles and I don't.
Just lose less.
Yep. I go, oh, like the temptation is to play Martyr Slash and say, okay, if that's a projectile, I can close to and hit, or I can get my transformation. And I still might, but probably I'll play the focus, draw a card, and then boost the Martyr Slash.
Right.
To if because this prevents a push, and if they have pushy stuff, then I don't want to get pushed. But yeah, focus is focus. It does all the things that everybody wants. It prevents you from being moved. It makes you lose a little less when you lose. It replaces itself by drawing a card. Just don't get it stunned, so don't play it face up at spike range.
Right.
Now maybe you don't have a choice because it was your second card. Well, don't worry about that. Like that across the board, don't feel bad about your second card losing. Allow your opponent to feel good about your second card losing because they're going to feel real bad when your first
Later
card
on,
wins.
when you kill them.
Yes.
Your second card losing is a way to keep your opponent playing the game without getting tilted, so you can play longer and kill them.
Yes. Oh, I said I wasn't going to make this a hour-long spiel about how I love Emogine, but unironically, one of my primary reasons I love Emogine is she's an anti-salt mechanism.
Yeah.
She's real good at making the game look close, even if it wasn't, because you can spend a bunch of life, you can lower your own life by a lot of means.
Yep.
And then the resources that you're getting back or the options you're getting back in return are deceptive in how strong they are and how quickly they can end the game. And the stuff you do that ends the game, especially the stuff you do that ends the game abruptly, is flashy.
Is
It is a
cool, right?
spectacle. Like
Right,
it's not like, okay, I got ground out after 6 turns of not having any options. It's, oh, she dumps all of these resources to do a thing that hit me for like 10. Okay,
right.
fair
That
enough.
was that was cool.
Um,
Hey, do you want to play
like
again?
yeah, like games are faster than a lot of characters. They're explosive and they're spectacular. Yeah.
Right,
Um. Anyway, yes, love them. Uh, reading exists. It's whatever. Like it's maybe the strongest. It's one of the strongest boosts ever printed. It's also kind of whatever because generally you don't need to care about your opponent's hands. Like you care about what options they have available as a grappler, or where you go, okay, are they out of fasts? Are they out of mid speeds? Are they out of slows? Forcing a specific response is way more of a how you answer a set play. Um, it is not a I need to whittle a hole in their defenses. You can punch through defenses. You can do all kinds of good things, and this does for you what most people need reading to do. This boost.
right. This
Um,
this diffuses set play just as well. Actually, better because it's getting you advantage, and arguably it means that you get to keep your focus as well, and you want to play that.
exactly. Where it's like, yeah, reading is strong. You don't have any special way to see hands. You often don't need them to play a specific thing to lose a strike. You need them to not play a specific thing to lose a strike.
Right,
Um, and focus is just enough value that you are generally you'll generally prefer to play it. You're not a character who especially favors reading. And now I say that, you know, how much you value reading is often a player thing. If you like it, use it. Whatever. Um, the only problem is that you can't do both of these in one turn, right? So you'll have to gain advantage the old-fashioned way, I guess.
right.
Um, but yeah, uh, similar parry, right? Parry's good. I don't need to talk much about parry and reading. They are very strong. They are very
Yeah,
useful. Use them as
there
you see
are
fit.
enough ink has been spilled about the quality of these two boosts that we can probably find it anywhere.
Yeah, but yeah,
Yep.
so for 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 posterity, parry's great, block is mediocre, especially on you because you are high damage swings. Both of these are good for mitigating damage. These attacks, they have armor. That's what they
Yep.
do.
Yep.
Focus mitigates losses in other ways, economically and positioning wise, and that's extremely useful. Reading is, yeah, winnowing a hole in somebody's setup, and you don't really need it to do that. You have lots of ways to do that because you have large red numbers and this boost.
And this boost, sure.
Um, so you can use it, but it costs you a focus. I would tend to prefer spending even more resources for even more value.
Yeah,
Um,
like focus. So focus reading is a zero force boost, but it costs a focus. Evil Within is a 2 force ultra boost. It's 4 force to 1. Would you still prefer to diffuse a setup with Evil Within?
if I believe I can, yes. Like the if the
Wow.
if the setup is we're at range, I don't know, 3, and they have +3 power and +3 speed, then I am concerned that they have a spike in hands,
Right.
which means that I do play the evil within. If this sounds insane, they're not playing the spike that they have in hands, right?
Right.
That's the point of evil within. If I
That's
if
why.
I
Yeah, that's
believe
why
they
you
are
would do it.
setting up a thing in hand, I do this.
Right.
Um, if the setup is actually like somewhere in the middle where it's, oh, okay, we're at range 2 and they have +2 speed, like that's actually more awkward because they have a wider variety of things that are reasonable. It's not
Right.
a specific telegraph, and it's not a specific thing that I'm afraid of. Um, like at range, so like at range 2, okay, if I make them wild swing, they might wild swing the spike, and then I get stunned. Because sorry, to be clear, what I'm caring about here is making sure I get this after advantage
Right.
as part of this. Like I want to do all the things this does. If I miss the advantage, then I miss half the value of this boost. Like that is a lot of value because I like turns. Um, so depending on what their setup looks like, I will favor this because yeah, it lets me take the next turn. It destroys whatever their setup is. It costs this, and also the cost is deceptive because that cost might mean I'm gaining life in the process.
Sure.
Um,
True. Okay.
albeit that's just one life for one gauge. It's not a lot, but it might. Um, but yeah, but the your setup is gone and I have advantage, and that was probably guaranteed, or at least meaningfully guaranteed in the ways that matter, is worth a lot. Um, maybe I break your setup is a lot less comfortable to me, where I'm like,
Right.
okay, you know. So like, if I'm reading as Imogene, it's probably I'm probably throwing a hail mary. I'm probably saying, okay, you have built up your setup so much that I don't think I can reasonably contest it. but that means you took the risk of drawing a bunch of cards. Like, let's see if you kept any normals.
Right.
Name the worst thing. And I don't really like doing that. It's a thing I do because it is a good thing to do against people who let it happen. It's what kills me.
Right.
I
Yeah. Like,
can't
leaving
count
yourself
how many games
vulnerable
I
to
lose that
reading
way.
is a skill, right? Like you like mitigating that is a skill. Um,
Absolutely.
Test your
Um,
opponent's skill with it.
yeah, and that's fine. Uh, but short of that, right, using it just to sort of like defray risks or make it less likely or improve the chance of something. Nah, you don't need that. You
Right.
can just throw something EX. You can build a better hands. You can be in a position. That's the biggest one probably, where you didn't need to make sure they played something or didn't play something. You just had something awesome.
Right.
Do those things instead, and then you can play a focus at some point, and that's nice.
And that works. Okay. Cool.
Hmm.
So that's every card in your kit.
Hmm.
We've talked combos, we've talked transforms, we've talked overall game plan. The last question I had before we move over to counterplay and start wrapping things up was a little bit more on economy because
Hmm.
like Gauge is obviously valuable. A lot of it is going to go towards building a hand and changing cards. Maybe you're throwing alters with it, but hey, your alters work even when you don't hit with them.
Hmm.
Um, when you are crafting EX attacks, that's happening just as you're playing grappler neutral, all that stuff. When you're
Hmm.
actually at range 2, because it is so rare for you to actually be at range 2, the time for handcrafting is over at that point, right? You are
Hmm.
attacking at that point.
By default, yeah. Like I might play a boost to cement my advantage,
Right.
right? Like I mentioned Fierce there, but I'm not going to be changing cards at range 2, um, because I don't want to let the opportunity slip. I'm going to be initiating with the Wild Swing,
Okay. So
almost
so
certainly.
you are using every other point in the game, and in fairness, there's going to be a lot of other points in the game because when you're at range 2, the game won't last long, and you won't be at range 2 often. To
Mhm.
change cards, move all of your economic concerns, and then just like with Tager at range 1 or Potemkin at range 1, now you're here and it's kind of go time.
I would agree. Yes,
Okay, cool.
I'll give one caveat, right? If your opponents, there's very few, but if your opponents can compete with you at range 2, um, Ragna comes to mind. And
Right,
Ragna is actually still a little worse than you at range 2, but he has some stuff that annoys you.
right,
Um, and but yeah, can compete with you at your favorite range. Then just initiate less. Um, like build EXs because your EXs at range 2 are pretty well nigh uncontestable. Even if
right.
they have awesome cards, they have to also be building for EXs. And the way that you lose strikes tends to be in a way that is, how to put it, you have so many sweeps, you can just keep throwing sweeps for days, and they will run out of spikes. And that means eventually they'll start trading down and have to go, okay, I guess I'm not going to be sitting here trading with you at range 2 forever.
Right.
Um, that's not the cleanest way of putting it, but it's kind of a point of you are a character who trades. You have a bunch of printed armor and guard. Well, a bunch of printed guard and some printed armor, which means that as they are contesting you at your favorite range, like they have to have exactly all mid speeds, and even then you still have some fasts. So
Right.
you're playing Exceed at that point. Like you're playing the mix ups at range 2. You can wild swing stuff on defense and have a completely reasonable mix up, and then spend your time building an offense that they can't answer.
Right.
Um,
And that's against an opponent who can contest you.
yeah, which most people
Against everybody else, you just run them over.
yeah, against everybody else, it is a you run the odds, you run the number. Like again, my play style, right?
Right.
Against everybody else at range 2, you initiate, and a percentage of the time you whiff, and everybody laughs, and they're like, "Okay, ha, yeah, you got your +3 power block." You're like, "Ah, yeah, +3 power block, let's go,"
Yep.
and you laugh about it. And then there, other percentage of the time they're like, "Okay, I guess I'll play the one thing I have that actually deals with that." Jeez, and then the other percentage of the time they go, "What what did I have that dealt with this?" And you say nothing.
Yeah, the thing
Um,
that you already played.
yeah, like the thing you played, or just nothing in the world existed because this is my 12 power touch of divinity hand of judgment with +2 power. Like,
Right.
okay, die, I guess.
Yeah.
Like you have those, and all of those will happen. Expect and accept that all of them will happen.
Yep.
Know that when you lost, when you lose, like the complete loss conditions, try to manipulate your circumstances. Try to maintain, like, count your cards, know your odds, so that your losses will be relatively minimal. Lose by 3 life at a time if you can help it as you're losing. Getting your block spiked at range 2 sucks. getting blocked to show up at all sucks. Gonna happen sometimes.
Yep.
And then when they are beating stuff, they're beating stuff by spending good cards, fine and good. Keep those in mind so that as the game comes to its close, now they don't have them. Now you can kill them. Yeah, like that's you're inexorable in that way.
Right.
Uh,
Your face up wild swings at that point are testing your opponent's resolve to hold cards that will beat you when you're even scarier later.
mhm.
Okay,
Yep.
interesting. Is that a good time to move into counterplay?
Yeah, feels like it to me.
Okay, cool.
All right. So how does one kill this unkillable monster? Well, I'm sure you can guess the number one most obvious, most important thing. Hey, look, don't be at range 2. Be
Yep.
anywhere else.
Yep, be
Um,
anywhere else.
yeah, especially 3 or greater, right? Like, she's still got nasty stuff at 1 that you don't really wanna have to think about, where you're like, "Ah, is this the blood for blood? Is this the martyr's lash? Is this the just the grass to throw me back in the corner? Is this the purifying chime that I can't cross out of?" Like, ideally, don't let her play those mix-ups, just don't be at a range where they matter.
Right.
Um, yeah, keep out of her face. She will sometimes assault in, but be aware, like be wary of mix-ups. You're just playing your seat at that point. Like, look at what your tools are, decide how best you want to deploy them to mitigate the risk of her coming in versus her throwing a spike that doesn't improve her positioning, but does maybe stun out something that you had that you wanted to actually use.
Right.
Um, and then the heart of the grappler game is when this happens, or something a lot like this. Uh, how do you survive? And the answer is generally you play a boost. If you have stat boost of any sort, you can boost defend and say, okay, it sucks that I'll get hit for 7, but I still get to participate.
Right.
Um, like it now is way harder for her to hit the breakpoint of I stun, sweep, and focus, and then she has to decide if she's going to throw a much lower commitment payouts that, like her own spike, for example. But she would have to play from hand. It's probably going to be a much lower power value.
Right.
Um, and just says, I'm going to ignore your little defense, but then passes the turn to you. Or commits a ton of resources on her Evil Within, her answer to all boosts forever, but is very expensive if she's getting rid of 1 boost with it. Or swing anyway, and just accept that you're going to be able to trade with her for most things that she could do, right? And that's an uncomfortable decision for her, right? She wants to swing for the fences, knowing that statistically she's overwhelmingly advantaged, and occasionally there's going to be things that you can't do anything about. If you put speed or defenses into play, you'll say it's almost impossible for you to be in the for you to have things that I can't do anything about.
Right. And
Um,
like how like basically now you're asking like, are you sure? How
yeah,
positive are you that you can actually stop me? Or
yeah. It's like, do you
how
really
positive are you that I can't stop you rather?
right? It's like, yeah. Do you really believe that I don't have the thing? Because with +2 speed, she's like, all right, well, I'll throw my speed 6, and you'll go, cool. I'll play assault.
Right.
She throws her, cool unstunnable speed 4. Well, now your spike is speed 5, so just beat it, right?
Right.
Um, and uh, all the more so if you are here, where like now you have a cross that you can initiate with for free. You can boost +2 speed, and now she can't throw anything at you for free because you can cross out of everything. Um, that said, I wouldn't put the speed here. I'm just saying this is what speed does. If you have extra speed boosts in your kit, sure, throw them around willy nilly. But yeah, you'll need some of them for the situation where she is massively advantaged, because without boosts, like without meaningful stat boosts that improve your chances against her, you will lose these strikes.
And
And
probably the
then
game off of those strikes.
yeah, and probably the game because of how much value she's getting, and
Right.
and and especially because like you initiating into her doesn't scare her at all,
Right.
like almost ever, right? Like you range 1 to 3, you initiate into her, and she has a reasonable card off the top of her deck, and maybe she gets a gauge out of it too. Um, and as the game progresses and she gets transformations, the reasonable card will be a reasonable card with +2 power on it. And
Right.
you'll start to lose on the overall value. I mean, I put these together so I don't lose track. Anyway, like you'll start to lose on the overall value proposition of every strike, because you initiating is not like it's not something that she worries about. She's not speed sensitive. Like she has to be aware of your movements. Like the only thing she needs to worry about, because she can just guard through most stuff. So like you have a problem if you are reliant on I win strikes when I initiate, unless you have a lot of something. And for
Right.
most characters, it's not a thing. But you might have a lot of power, you might have a lot of speed, you might have a lot of extra defenses. Use whichever one you have. Most of the time, rely on not being there,
There. Right.
and then watch her discards, because like any grappler, she's gonna have to occasionally make choices. She might be in the worst world where you're here and her hand and she has 0 gauge and this is her hands,
Right, and she's got to get
right?
rid of a transform
And
or
she's
and an
like,
EX.
yeah, and like realistically, I in this situation would transform this and just take the hit. Like go, okay, shoot me with your projectile. I'm
Right.
making sure I have something and I'm gonna wait. Or maybe prepare depending on, but I'm probably not prepare. I would probably at least do this because I don't want to get randomly discarded or something. But yeah, like, and at the point shooter. Like you got options. Build your resources if you need to, but if you have projectiles, just shooter.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like she hates to have to make those decisions, but she will sometimes. And uh, gradually, and okay, and I should also say, because we're talking about counterplay, right? Most Imogines are not the I'm going to standard range 2 while swing fades up all the time.
Right.
Yet I'll change the world. Just wait.
Oh
But
yeah, no. Everyone's gonna see this video. It's gonna be awesome.
yeah, yeah. But at the time of this recording, most Imogines will always wild swing on defense because they want to maximize their potential value and minimize their potential risk with this ability.
Right.
And at that point, know that hey, you're initiating somebody who's always responding with wild swings. Their cards are reasonable, but they're still responding with wild swings, which means that they are statistically slightly less favored than you if you are playing things from your hand all the time. So you can initiate even at range 2, as long as you know your opponent is doing that. If your opponent is, more like me, where they are holding EXs to respond with and then initiating at range 2 with wild swings, what you should be doing is you should be holding things that will give you a bunch of value into free strikes, because occasionally you'll get that free strike. Occasionally
Right.
you'll get that range 2 grasp or range 2 block, and you'll say, thank you. I was waiting for a chance to land Donkey Kick or, Potemkin Buster or whatever.
Right.
Um, but like have something like that ready, and it generally won't be that hard for you to maintain hand because it's easier to run away than it is to, or sorry,
Chase.
it because you have this boost and she does not have another thing.
Right.
She's going to be dropping options consistently, and you probably don't want to assault into somebody with several extra sweeps. Um, so, oh, I'm sorry, I just realized you might not have this. Strive does not have a retreat boost that is universal, so it can be a little awkward.
Right.
If you're a Strive character, instead of retreating across, like running away and then retreating a bunch, what you should instead consider doing is dragging her into the corner. Because now for her to get to range 2 is more expensive or costs, well, it's more expensive. It might cost her cross is her best case, is that she was holding her cross for that moment.
Right.
Um, but if you drag her into the corner with area shift, then you gain a gauge. You might well pass the turn here. Now your cross is like your second cross is that much stronger, but also you're a Strive character. You probably have something to do with the opponents in the corner. Um, I'll leave that to whatever your kit is, but they've got some wild stuff.
Sure.
It is. But anyway, if you have a retreat boost, yes, use it. Stay away. Do all the things you would normally do to get away from a grappler, because she's a grappler, but she's a grappler at range 2, and that means that this is going to feel awkward. Where you're like, well, I guess I can go to range 1,
Right. And that's better for you.
and that's probably better than going
Okay.
to range 2. Um, but yeah. Oh yeah, so positioning is the number 1 counterplay. Boosting if you have it, boosting stats, especially power, especially speed, but whatever you have the most of, whatever you have the most liberal access to, do that. I wouldn't do it excessively because Evil Within can diffuse a big setup.
Right.
And then overall be aware of, like, how do I put this? The shape of her game plan, the shape of her play in the timeline with her life, where you go, okay, I'm gonna need to deal big damage in a few turns at the end of the game, because that's her plan, right? Like she's gonna make late game happen at a certain time, which is when you have, maybe around 10 to 12 life. Um, and if you are assuming that you can play like relatively loose as you get to that life total, and that you will still have time to draw into more things, that's not okay. Like hold tools that will keep you alive a little bit. Whether it's your block, whether it's your focus, whether it's your cross, hold stuff that will keep you alive against that brush with death as she tries to close the game from surprisingly high life totals, because most Imogines will do that.
Right.
Like these boosts are so good and these attacks are so good. You will probably see some of that coming out. If you can survive 1 or 2 of those, where you go, okay, 0 ultras are available, 4 are in her discard, I'm alive.
Right.
then you have a great window to come in and punish and do whatever it is that you do.
Right. Now you can end. Now you can get to the late game on your terms from whatever threshold your character needs because you've gotten through it at your 12 life threshold or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, because
Okay.
then you can go, okay, maybe I just play, assault and then grasp, and then I have a cross, and she actually has a hard time answering that,
Right.
because she already used all of her resources.
Her big
But
crazy pal, and I might trade down, right? But I'm not going to trade down by 12 in one strike anymore.
mhm.
Okay. All right. So
Any
it's
questions, comments, concerns?
no, that all sounds incredible. I know that we like to talk about similar characters, and then there's one other thing I wanted to mention before we wrap it up, but I think this might be uh, uh, enough to get people started with Imogene, certainly.
Excellent.
So who else? Who else plays the game the way that Imogene does?
All right, so this is a season 1 character.
Yep.
Um, actually, I mentioned Autorathi earlier.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
This is Marathi.
this is Autorathi's brother Marathi.
Yeah, this is Manuel Rathi. Um, where he is a so the nickname that those of us in dev and well, just players actually. Anyway, the community has used nicknames of consistency and reward wild swingers.
Hmm.
Imogene is a consistency wild swinger, right? She has big reward, but she is very tuned around. I have a consistent favorite range. I don't have janky stuff that's going to randomly miss.
Right.
I've got good stuff that is solid, and then I increase my reward gradually by making sure I can actually be in that range. Conversely, like Skullman and Dan, right? Dan has some consistency tools, but he's mostly a reward wild singer.
She
He
mostly
is
just hits
a
you real hard.
yeah. It's like he has several things that are not at all good at his favorite range, which is 2, by the way.
Right.
Wild swingers often prefer range 2. Um, but like he doesn't have any of the kind of like, oh, I can just be comfortable knowing that at range 2 most of my deck works. He has well, most of my deck works, and some of it's incredibly bad.
Some of it's terrible here.
Yeah, like and it's not even actually most of that. It's like half that it works, but like the half that works is awesome.
Right.
That's reward, right? It's how are you handling the risk reward split and all that. So Marathi is a consistency wild swinger. His ability, like hers, it's supposed to be I think before you said, but whatever. Yeah, before setting wild swing, look at the top card of your deck. You may draw it, then set your wild swing.
Right.
So instead of spend a life to add to gauge, it's just you can add to your hands, but same kind of idea as far as you get 2 pulls at every wild swing.
Right.
Marathi also has the notable property of being the first character that we referred to as all sweeps. Use your speed 1 sweep with 7 guard, your speed 2 sweep with 5 guard, your speed 3 sweep with 5 guard, your speed 3 sweep with 5 guard that hits cross, and your speed 4 sweep with 6 guard that has 7 power.
Yep.
And it also closes to it's an ultra. It's pretty good. Anyway.
It's pretty good. It's a Red Horizon.
But yes. Yeah, it's like he's got another special and another ultra, but it's a lot of sweeps. If you like sweep, you can play sweep the character. He's kind of sweep the character, and that's pretty good. If you like all the damage numbers I have described, but you're not so much about that like grappler neutral, well, here's a reward wild swinger who is very, very big reward. Janky neutral, still favorite range of 2. Like I said, that's pretty common with wild swingers. But with neutral skips, notably this attack, which is a speed 6 close mini. And well, some silly tools. That boost is one of the strongest in the game.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's I'm invincible is my nickname for that boost.
I'm looking forward to this lesson, D.
Oh yeah. Oh, that must be me, isn't it? Because it's
Oh
Skullman.
yeah, it's definitely you.
Yeah, awesome. Still
Stay
a
tuned.
main.
Stay tuned for that one, folks.
Yep. But yeah, Skullman, who is very, very rewarding, range 2, plays less neutral, but sure likes those big numbers and sure is a wild swinger. Has a little consistency, not nearly as much.
Okay.
If you are a Hecaton Kier, you like control, you like information. This is not really my forte, honestly. I know, strangely enough, I would not have put these together, but several Hecaton Kiers I know, like Arakune, he does have a thing where he interacts with wild swings in strange ways on purpose, which he does.
Yep.
He has an invalidate ultra, like Touch Divinity. where he likes to invalidate it, but he gains weird properties. He also has a bunch of invalidation tech related to his Exceed mode. Have you done an Arcane lesson? I don't
I
remember.
have, yeah. Faust taught me Arakune a
Of
little while
course,
ago.
of course. Yeah, so
Yep.
he went through how the overdrive works with ultra invalidation and all that.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
but yeah, so Arcane, like if you like information and or you like the invalidation tech, Arcane is another character who is very much made to take advantage of it.
Okay.
Um, he is far more controlly. He's far more for the Hecatoncheir player. Um, he's not as wild as the Imogene player. He is deceptively unwild because he often knows what's going on with the top of his deck.
Right.
Um, let's see. Um, if you like wild things and you want to see more silly things happen, but also you like boost characters, because Imogene is not a boost character at all. Faust and Platinum are both fun. Faust, notably, I like because he, was raised by grapplers, even if he's not a grappler.
Right.
Um, he likes the number 7. I also like the number 7. I would prefer 8 or 10, possibly, but
If you
he
could
likes
get it
7.
right, 7 is still pretty good.
Yeah, and he gets 7 without too much difficulty. Like here's a 7, and then there's a few other ways you can do it.
Yep.
Um, and I do like that. He actually plays stat boost though. So if you feel like if you look at a hand of transformations and you're like, I don't know how to play neutral at all, like
Right.
my world is ended because I don't have any boosts available to me. Okay, yeah, maybe consider Faust. Platinum is another wild booster, but actually I wouldn't really compare Platinum to Imogene because I can't play Platinum, but I can play Imogene. Um, that's a whole nother matter.
I guess
Uh,
there is also sort of like a subcategory of characters who are like Emogene. It's like go look at uh any other character that D has done a lesson on. It is another character that D likes. Therefore, it is like Emogene.
there is some of that. Yeah, it's like, hey, consistent favored range and a grappler. Not across the board because
Yep.
I love Jacko. Jacko is not those things.
It's not those
Um,
things. No.
yeah, and Viper. Well, the Viper does have consistent range, but she's not a wild swinger and she's not a grappler.
Right.
So it's like the two extremes of character I like. Imogene is one of them, and there's a lot of those. Rimless is a grappler, Tager, Potemkin.
Yep.
Um, obviously I pulled out Marathi as like the most similar, probably. Um, but yeah, I'm trying to think of another Hecatoncheir character because, again, not exactly my forte, but uh, mm,
Well, I mean, I can always go and ask a
trying to-
Hecatoncheir player. I can go.
go ask like Faust or somebody because
Yeah.
I'm not this kind of player.
I'll add it to the written guide.
All right, sounds good.
Cool.
Um, yep. All right, cool. Seems good.
All right. So that's if you like Emogene,
And you
take a
should.
look at yeah, and you should. She's the best character in the game. Take a
Mhm.
look at those characters. If you have never played Seventh Cross before, because like me, you got into Exceed a little bit after it rotated out, and it was kind of intimidating. But you somehow, despite being intimidated by Imogene, play Arakune. Maybe go try out Imogene. Give her a look. She seems really really cool. Um, as we wrap this up, D, I wanna revisit the one true tier list here
Mhm. Mhm.
because obviously, so your main is the best character in the game, and
Mhm.
in your explanation of that tier list, you talked a lot about like you're liking a character enough to main them is going to be one of the things that makes you good with them because Exceed is a balanced game and player skill matters a lot.
Mhm.
Um, this show is kind of predicated on that idea that
Mhm.
if you are really good with a character, odds are you spent a lot of time with them, and that means that you probably like them. And that means that you are a perfect person to be an advocate for that character and be enthusiastic about that character when talking. So I always thank you at the end of these lessons for your expertise and for your time, obviously. But in light of this tier list and in light of Emogene being your favorite character, I specifically want to thank you for being an enthusiastic advocate for her because she seems awesome, and
Oh, emphatically.
I really really appreciate um, having you on talking about your favorite character. It's been a good way to spend my evening. So thank you so much.
Delighted to, and glad to have the excuse to. As I said, I could have talked another full hour, maybe with the help of some lozenges, uh, about all the things I love about Imogene that aren't just how to play her and how to use her tools.
Right.
But yeah, I gave some brief tidbits, and you gave some brief tidbits. The short of it is like, here's a bunch of ways that you can experience and experiment with this character. Uh, try her out, play her. She is awesome. And to be clear, this is not how to put this. I started maining Imogene before she had art, right?
Okay.
I'm not speaking from waifu maining. I'm
Right.
speaking from the mechanics of this character I fell in love with.
Right.
And there's good reasons for that, as I think I've shown. So,
Absolutely.
try her out. She's an absolute blast. I'm glad to have shared some of that enthusiasm. I feel like I was holding myself back, and it's still shown through. Not that I was trying to hold myself back, but I'm like, I don't want to talk for 4 hours here.
Right.
Um,
Right. Well, I'm sure that your throat and your supply of lozenges appreciates that. Our audience might appreciate that too. I would love to hear another hour and a half of Imogene conversation. I am gonna, I think,
so good.
wrap it up here for your sake. Thank you so much, D. I always appreciate talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for having me. Had a great time.
Of course, of course. And folks at home, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I will see you all for the next one. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Oh, stay hydrated.
Stay hydrated, please.